Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ravencroft, and what I'm about to tell you breaks every promise I made when I became a park ranger 17 years ago. I swore to protect and serve, to keep visitors safe, and to never speak about things that might scare people away from our beautiful mountains. But after what happened in September of 1976, I can't stay quiet anymore. I've spent my whole career in the George Washington National Forest, working the Shenandoah Valley Corridor. Got my PhD in bird science when I was 25, joined the Cherokee Scottish Ornithological Society, and published papers on night-flying raptors that universities still use today. I mention this because I want you to know I'm not some crazy person who sees monsters in every shadow. I'm a scientist. I study birds for a living. For 17 years, I've been the guy other rangers call when someone reports a giant bird or flying monster. I'm the one who explains that what they saw was probably a great horned owl in their headlights, or maybe a turkey vulture caught in weird lighting. I've talked dozens of scared campers down from ledges of panic, showing them wingspan charts and explaining how darkness plays tricks on your eyes. I never believed in the stories. Not the old Cherokee tales my grandmother told me about the Talanoa, the giant birds that carried off warriors. Not the Civil War ghost stories that locals whispered about, and especially not the recent reports of something with glowing red eyes flying over Skyline Drive. That was before I met it myself. The trouble started on September 23rd. We'd been having a weird warm spell for late September, with thick fog rolling through the valleys every night like something was breathing down there in the darkness. I was working the night shift, covering the 25-mile stretch between Front Royal and Luray, when the first accident happened. A family from Pennsylvania, the Johnsons, crashed their station wagon into a guardrail at mile marker 42. When I got there, Mr. Johnson was pacing around his smashed car, talking fast and wild. His wife sat in the passenger seat, shaking like a leaf. Their two kids huddled in the back, crying softly. "It came right at us," Johnson kept saying. "Right at the windshield, wings as wide as the road, eyes like red headlights." I did my usual routine. Asked about their vision, if they'd been drinking, whether they might have dozed off. Johnson got angry, started yelling that he knew what he saw. But when I examined their car, I found something that made my stomach drop. Deep scratches ran across the roof. 4 parallel gouges in the metal, each about an inch apart. They started at the windshield and dragged back toward the trunk, like something with claws had grabbed the car and tried to lift it. I'd seen plenty of animal damage before. Bears leave different marks. Eagles and hawks have talons, but nothing big enough to make gouges like these. I measured them with my ruler and checked my field guides. No bird in North America has a talon spread that wide. I wrote it up as unknown wildlife encounter and forgot about it. That was my first mistake. 3 nights later, it happened again. Then again. By the end of the week, we had 5 separate incidents. Different families, different times of night, but always the same story. Something huge, flying at their cars, red eyes, wings that blocked out the sky, and always those claw marks on the roofs. My supervisor, Captain Reynolds, called me into his office on October 1st. "Tom, we've got a problem. These accident reports are getting attention from Richmond. The governor's office is asking questions. Tourism board is worried. I need you to figure out what's really happening out there." I grabbed my gear that night: night vision goggles, trail cameras, my bird identification books, and a thermos of coffee. If there was a large raptor causing these accidents, I was going to find it and relocate it. Simple as that. I set up at mile marker 42, where the first accident happened. The fog was rolling in thick, and the temperature had dropped 10 degrees since sunset. I put on my night vision goggles and settled in to wait. That's when I noticed the silence. In 17 years of night surveys, I'd never heard the mountains so quiet. No owl calls, no rustling in the underbrush, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped. It was like someone had turned off all the sound in the world except my own breathing and heartbeat. My radio crackled. "Unit 7, this is base. Do you copy?" I grabbed the handset. "This is Ravencroft. Go ahead." "Tom, we've got a problem." Janet Morrison missed her check-in. She was supposed to radio in from the Thornton Gap area at 11:30. It's now past midnight. Janet was a good ranger, 10 years experience, never missed a check-in, never took unnecessary risks. If she wasn't answering her radio, something was wrong. "I'm heading that way," I said, packing up my equipment. But as I started my truck, I heard something that made me freeze. A sound like wind rushing through massive wings, coming from somewhere high above the trees. I looked up through my windshield, but saw only darkness and fog. The sound faded into the distance, heading north toward Thornton Gap, toward where Janet was supposed to be. The drive to Thornton Gap usually takes 20 minutes on the winding mountain roads. I made it in 12, pushing my truck as fast as I dared through the fog. My headlights barely cut 10 feet ahead, and the silence followed me the whole way. Even my engine seemed quieter than usual, like the mountains were swallowing every sound. I found Janet's patrol car at the Thornton Gap overlook, doors closed, engine running, headlights still on. No sign of Janet anywhere. I grabbed my flashlight and walked around the vehicle. The driver's door was unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Janet's radio sat on the passenger seat, the handset dangling by its cord. When I picked it up and pressed the talk button, nothing happened. The radio was dead, even though the car's electrical system was working fine. "Janet!" I called out. My voice echoed off the rocks and disappeared into the fog. "Janet Morrison!" No answer. I followed standard search protocol, walking in expanding circles around the car. Janet's flashlight was on the ground about 20 feet away. The lens cracked, the bulb burned out. Next to it, I found her ranger hat. That's when I saw the first footprint. It was pressed deep into the soft earth near the cliff edge, but it wasn't human. Too big, too wide, with what looked like claw marks at the front. I knelt down and shined my light on it. The print was nearly a foot long and shaped like a bird's foot, but no bird I knew walked on the ground with feet that size. I was taking measurements when I heard the wing sound again, closer this time, just above the tree line. I looked up and saw something that made my blood turn cold. A shadow passed between me and the low-hanging clouds. It was massive, easily 15 feet from wingtip to wingtip, moving in a way that no aircraft could. It banked and turned like a living thing, circling the overlook twice before disappearing back into the fog. I grabbed my radio and tried to call for backup, but got only static. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, pressing down on the mountain like a heavy blanket. My truck's headlights looked dimmer than before, as if the light itself was being absorbed by the darkness. Something crunched in the woods behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. "Janet, is that you?" More sounds. Heavy footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too spaced apart, like whatever was making them had a much longer stride than a human. And between the footsteps, a scraping noise, like something being dragged across the ground. I drew my service weapon and clicked off the safety. "This is Ranger Ravencroft. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, the only sound was my own rapid breathing and the quiet hum of Janet's patrol car. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. A low, rumbling sound, almost like a cat purring, but much deeper and longer. It seemed to come from all around me, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. I backed toward my truck, keeping the flashlight beam moving across the tree line. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 red dots, about 8 feet off the ground, watching me from the darkness between the trees. They glowed like coals, steady and unblinking. As I stared at them, they began to move, rising higher into the air, until they were at least 10 feet up. "What the hell?" I whispered. The eyes blinked once, slowly, and then they were gone. I ran to my truck and grabbed the radio, switching to the emergency frequency. "Base, this is Ravencroft. I need immediate backup at Thornton Gap. Officer down, possible." I stopped. Possible what? Giant bird with glowing eyes? That would end my career faster than I could blink. Instead, I said, "Missing person situation, requesting search and rescue team. Copy, Unit 7. Teams are en route. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. I stayed by the trucks, keeping both flashlight and headlights pointed toward the trees, but I didn't see the red eyes again. When the search team finally arrived, led by Captain Reynolds, I had to make a decision about how much to tell them. I decided to stick to the facts. Janet's abandoned car, her damaged radio, the strange footprint by the cliff edge. I didn't mention the shadow in the sky or the eyes in the trees. I knew how crazy it would sound. We searched until dawn, but found no trace of Janet Morrison. The footprint I'd seen was gone, washed away by a sudden rainstorm that seemed to come out of nowhere. Her radio was working fine when the tech guys tested it. Even the crack in her flashlight lens had somehow disappeared. It was like the mountain had swallowed up all the evidence, leaving only Janet's empty patrol car and a lot of unanswered questions. Captain Reynolds pulled me aside as the search team was packing up. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Did you see anything unusual out here tonight? Anything at all?" I looked into his tired eyes and made my second mistake. "No, sir, nothing unusual." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, we'll keep looking for Janet, but I'm assigning you to desk duty for the rest of the week. You look like you need some rest." I drove home as the sun came up over the Blue Ridge Mountains, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just fog and shadows and an overactive imagination. But I couldn't shake the memory of those red eyes, watching me from the darkness. And I couldn't stop thinking about the sound of those massive wings heading north into the night. I spent 3 days behind a desk, filing reports and answering phones, but I couldn't stop thinking about Janet. The official search had been called off after 48 hours. No body, no evidence of foul play, no leads to follow. The department wrote it up as a voluntary disappearance, suggesting that Janet might have had personal problems we didn't know about. I knew better. On my 4th day of desk duty, Captain Reynolds called me back into his office. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usual neat uniform wrinkled and coffee-stained. "Tom, we've got a situation. 3 hikers went missing yesterday on the Appalachian Trail section near Compton Peak. 2 college kids and their guide. The Park Service is sending in a full search team, and they want our best tracker along." "What about my desk duty?" "Forget the desk duty. We need you out there." He handed me a folder. "Read this on the way. And Tom, I want you to know that if you see anything at all that seems off, you report it immediately, no matter how crazy it sounds." The file contained statements from other hikers who'd been in the area. Their stories made my blood run cold. Sounds of massive wings overhead, a feeling of being watched from the trees, and 3 separate reports of red eyes glowing in the darkness. One hiker, a man named David Chen, had taken a photograph. It showed what looked like a large bird perched on a dead tree, but the image was blurry and the bird was too big, the proportions all wrong. Chen insisted it was at least 8 feet tall. I met the search team at the Compton Peak trailhead. 12 experienced search and rescue volunteers, 2 Park Service rangers, and a bloodhound named Rex who had found dozens of missing persons over the years. The team leader, a tough woman named Sarah Martinez, briefed us on the situation. The missing hikers are Mark and Jenny Calloway, both 19, students at VCU. Their guide is Robert Moss, age 34, been leading hikes in this area for 8 years. They were supposed to return yesterday evening. Their car is still in the parking lot. We split into 3 teams and headed up different sections of the trail. I was paired with Martinez and Rex the bloodhound. We had the missing hikers' scent items, t-shirt from Mark, a sweatshirt from Jenny, and a work glove from their guide. Rex picked up the trail immediately, leading us up the rocky path toward Compton Peak. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. We found boot prints in the soft earth, a candy wrapper that matched the brand in Jenny's backpack, and a broken tree branch at exactly the right height for someone Mark's size to have bumped into it. Then Rex stopped. The bloodhound stood in the middle of the trail, whining and backing away from something ahead. His ears were pinned back, his tail tucked between his legs. In all my years working with search dogs, I'd never seen one refuse to follow a scent trail. "What's wrong with him?" Martinez asked. I knelt down beside Rex and tried to calm him, but he kept backing away, looking up at the trees above us. That's when I noticed what he was reacting to. The silence. Just like at Thornton Gap, the forest had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Even the wind had stopped. The only sound was Rex's anxious whining and our own breathing. "We should call this in," I said, reaching for my radio. Martinez grabbed my arm. "Look." She was pointing up at a large oak tree about 50 feet ahead. Carved deep into the bark, at least 20 feet off the ground, were 4 parallel scratches. They looked exactly like the claw marks on the crashed cars, but much larger and deeper. "How did something get up there to make those marks?" Martinez whispered. I was about to answer when we heard the sound. A deep, rumbling call that seemed to come from all around us, vibrating through the ground and up into our bones. Rex started howling and tried to run back down the trail. The sound came again, closer this time, and I finally understood what it was. It was a call, like birds make to communicate with each other. But no bird I'd ever studied made a sound like that. "We need to get out of here," I said. Martinez was staring up at the scratched tree. "But the missing hikers?" The rumbling call came a third time, directly overhead. We both looked up and saw something that made my knees go weak. A massive shape perched on a branch near the top of the oak tree. It was roughly humanoid but covered in dark fur or feathers. Its wings, partially spread for balance, had to be 15 feet across. And its eyes glowed red, even in the daylight. The creature tilted its head and looked down at us. For a moment that felt like hours, we stared at each other. I could feel something probing at the edges of my mind, like fingers pressing against my thoughts. Then it opened its wings fully and launched itself into the air. The downwash from those massive wings knocked both Martinez and me to the ground. Rex bolted down the trail, howling like he'd seen the devil himself. When I scrambled to my feet and looked up, the creature was circling overhead, just above the treetops. "Did you see that?" Martinez gasped, struggling to get up. Before I could answer, my radio crackled to life. "All units, this is Team 2. We found something, about half a mile up the North Trail." "What did you find?" Martinez managed to get her radio working. "You're not going to believe this. We found one of the missing hikers' backpacks. It's stuck in a tree, about 30 feet up." Martinez and I looked at each other, then up at the circling shadow above us. How did a backpack get 30 feet up in a tree? The voice on the radio continued. "And guys, there are claw marks all over the trunk." The shadow overhead banked and headed north, toward where Team 2 was reporting from. I grabbed Martinez's arm. "We need to get everyone out of these woods, right now." "But the missing people? I don't think we're going to find them alive." The radio crackled again. "All units, this is Team 3. We need immediate assistance." "We found." "Jesus Christ, what is that thing?" Then the radio went dead. We ran through the forest like our lives depended on it, which they probably did. The silence had broken, replaced by sounds that made my blood freeze. Tree branches snapping high overhead, the rush of massive wings, and worst of all, a keening cry that sounded almost human. When we reached the coordinates where Team 3 had been searching, we found their equipment scattered across a small clearing. Radios smashed, backpacks torn open, contents spread everywhere. But no sign of the three-person team. Martinez was checking her radio when I saw them. More of those impossible footprints, pressed deep into the earth around the clearing. But these were different from the ones I'd found at Thornton Gap. These looked like they'd been made by something walking upright, like a person, but with clawed feet and a stride twice as long as any human could manage. The prints led to the base of a massive pine tree. Looking up, I could see broken branches all the way to the top, like something very heavy had climbed up using the limbs as a ladder. "Martinez," I called softly. "Look at this." She came over and followed my gaze upward. High in the canopy, maybe 60 feet up, something was moving among the branches. It was too dark to see clearly, but I caught glimpses of red eyes and the outline of folded wings. "It's watching us," she whispered. That's when I realized what had been bothering me about the missing people. The bloodhound had followed their scent to a certain point, then refused to go further. The backpack in the tree, the scattered equipment. The creature wasn't just killing people, it was taking them somewhere. "We need to get out of here and call for backup," Martinez said, backing toward the trail. I started to follow her, but something made me stop. A sound, faint but unmistakable, a human voice, calling for help. "Did you hear that?" Martinez stopped. "Hear what?" The voice came again. Definitely human, definitely in distress. It seemed to be coming from above us, from the direction of the red eyes in the tree. "Someone's still alive up there," I said. "Tom, no, we need to get help." But I was already moving toward the base of the pine tree. The voice called out again, clearer this time. "Help me, please." It sounded like a young woman. Jenny Calloway, maybe, one of the missing college students. I found handholds in the rough bark and started climbing. The tree was easier to scale than I'd expected. The thing that had gone up before me had broken enough branches to create a natural ladder. 20 feet up, then 40, then 50. "Tom, get down from there," Martinez called from below. I ignored her and kept climbing. The voice was getting clearer. "Please, help me. I can't get down." At 60 feet, I reached a thick cluster of branches that formed a natural platform. And there, huddled against the trunk, was Jenny Calloway. She was alive, but barely. Scratches covered her arms and face, her clothes were torn, and she was shaking uncontrollably. When she saw me, she started crying. "Oh God, thank you," she sobbed. "I thought I was going to die up here." "Jenny, I'm Ranger Ravencroft. Can you tell me what happened? Where are Mark and your guide?" Her face went pale. "It took them. The thing with the red eyes, it carried them away." "How did you get up here?" "It brought me here too, but I think it was saving me for last." It kept coming back, looking at me, like it was deciding what to do. A chill ran down my spine. "Jenny, we need to get you down from here right now." I started to help her toward the broken branches we could use as a ladder, but she grabbed my arm. "It's coming back," she whispered. "I can feel it watching us." That's when I heard the wings again, much closer this time. The sound of something large moving through the air, heading straight for our tree. "Climb down," I told Jenny. "Fast as you can." She started down the makeshift ladder, but she was weak and scared, moving too slowly. The wing sounds were getting louder, accompanied by that deep, rumbling call I'd heard before. I looked up through the canopy and saw it coming. A massive shape blotting out the sky, red eyes fixed on our tree. It was moving with purpose, like a hawk diving for prey. "Faster!" I shouted to Jenny. She was only 30 feet down when the creature reached us. It landed on the branches above my head with enough force to shake the entire tree. Up close, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was about 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur that looked almost like feathers in the dim light. Its body was humanoid but wrong, too thin, too angular, with arms that were too long and ended in hands with curved claws. Its face was the worst part, almost human, but with large, lidless red eyes that seemed to glow from within. The creature looked down at me and made that rumbling sound again. This time, I felt something else with it, a pressure in my head, like someone trying to push thoughts into my brain. Asterisk, "You should not have come here." Asterisk, a voice said inside my mind. Not words, exactly, but meaning that bypassed my ears and went straight to my thoughts. I nearly fell off the tree in shock. The thing was talking to me telepathically. Asterisk, "The girl was meant for me." Asterisk, the voice continued. Asterisk, "As were the others. You interfere with something you do not understand." Asterisk, "Let her go," I said out loud, surprised that my voice worked. "Take me instead." The creature tilted its head, studying me with those burning red eyes. Asterisk, "You are different. You have the sight. That is why you can hear me." Asterisk, "I don't know what you're talking about. Just let the girl go." Without warning, the creature reached down and grabbed me with one clawed hand. Its grip was incredibly strong, like being caught in a steel trap. It lifted me up off the branches as easily as I might lift a child. Asterisk, "You want to understand? Then see." Asterisk, the world exploded into visions. I saw Skyline Drive as it would be in 2 months, a massive bridge collapse during rush hour, cars and trucks tumbling into the valley below, dozens of people screaming, dying, trapped in twisted metal. The date flashed in my mind, December 15th, 1976. Then more visions. A mine collapse in West Virginia, a dam failure in North Carolina, a terrible fire in a Virginia apartment building. All connected somehow, all part of the pattern I couldn't quite grasp. Asterisk, "I am the herald." Asterisk, the voice said. Asterisk, "I appear when great tragedy approaches. I choose those who can see, who can warn others." The Cherokee knew this. They called me Planua, the messenger of sorrow. The asterisk, "You're killing people," I managed to gasp. Asterisk, "I take only those who would die anyway in the coming disasters. Their sacrifice allows me to show the truth to chosen ones like you. You will warn people about the bridge. You will save hundreds of lives." Asterisk. The visions intensified. I saw myself in the weeks to come, frantically trying to convince authorities about the bridge collapse. I saw the disbelief in their eyes, the way they would dismiss me as crazy. But I also saw a few people who would listen, who would avoid the bridge on December 15th because of my warnings. Asterisk. This is your burden now. Asterisk, the creature said. Asterisk. You have seen the future. You cannot unsee it. Asterisk. Then it released me. I fell through the branches, bouncing off limbs and scraping against bark until I hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Above, I could hear Jenny screaming as the creature carried her away into the darkening sky. Martinez found me 20 minutes later, unconscious and bleeding from a dozen cuts and scrapes. I woke up in the University of Virginia Medical Center 3 days later. Captain Reynolds was sitting in a chair beside my bed, reading a newspaper. When he saw my eyes open, he folded the paper and leaned forward. "Welcome back, Tom. You've been out for a while." "Jenny Calloway," I said, my throat dry and raw. "Did you find her?" Reynolds shook his head. "No sign of her or the others. The official report says you fell from a tree during the search. 60 feet, they estimate. You're lucky to be alive." "That's not what happened." "I know." He pulled his chair closer to the bed. "Martinez told me what she saw. The thing in the tree, the red eyes, you talking to it before it grabbed you. She's been checked into the psychiatric ward for evaluation." My heart sank. "You don't believe her." "Tom, I've been a park ranger for 25 years. I've seen things in these mountains that don't make it into any official reports. So yes, I believe her. The question is, what do we do about it?" I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in my ribs. "There's going to be a bridge collapse on Skyline Drive. December 15th. During rush hour. Dozens of people are going to die unless we do something." Reynolds stared at me for a long moment. "How do you know that?" "It showed me, the creature. It called itself a herald, said it appears before tragedies to choose people who can warn others." "Tom, I know how it sounds, but you have to believe me. People are going to die." Reynolds was quiet for several minutes, just watching my face. "Finally," he said, "the FBI was here yesterday. They're taking over the investigation into the missing hikers. They've classified the whole thing and transferred jurisdiction away from the Park Service." "What does that mean?" "It means we're not supposed to talk about what happened. You're being reassigned to a desk job in Richmond, effective immediately. Martinez is being transferred to a park in Arizona. The search for the missing hikers has been called off. They're covering it up. They're making it go away." Reynolds stood up and walked to the window. "But Tom, I want you to know something. I've made some calls about that bridge you mentioned. December 15th, right? Turns out there have been some concerns about structural integrity. Budget issues have delayed inspections, but I've pushed through an emergency evaluation. They'll have engineers out there next week." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "So you believe me?" "I believe that sometimes we get information in ways we can't explain. And I believe it's better to be safe than sorry." He turned back from the window and looked at me seriously. "But Tom, I also need you to understand something. Your career with the Park Service is over. The FBI has made that clear. You can take the desk job in Richmond, or you can retire early with full benefits. Either way, you're done working in the field." Over the next few weeks, I tried to return to normal life, but the visions wouldn't stop. Sometimes I'd be sitting at my new desk in Richmond, when suddenly I'd see flashes of future disasters. A hotel fire in Norfolk, a landslide in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a chemical plant explosion in Lynchburg. Each vision came with a date and enough detail for me to make anonymous calls to authorities. Some of my warnings were heeded. The hotel upgraded their fire safety systems after an anonymous tip about code violations. The chemical plant increased security after reports of terrorist threats. Not all the disasters were prevented, but some were. And fewer people died because I spoke up. The bridge collapse happened exactly as I'd seen it, but on a smaller scale. The emergency inspection I'd prompted through Captain Reynolds found critical structural problems, and the bridge was closed for repairs 2 weeks before the scheduled collapse date. No one died. I never saw the creature again, but I know it's still out there. Every few months, there are reports of red eyes in the mountains, massive wings overhead, people going missing in the forest. The incidents always happen in the weeks before major tragedies, and sometimes, rarely, survivors are found who babble about visions and warnings and creatures that speak inside your mind. Most of them are dismissed as crazy. The lucky ones are quietly transferred to different jobs and told to keep their mouths shut. But I know the truth. The Mothman, just the BAT, because that's what I've come to call it, isn't a monster. It's something else. Something that exists at the intersection of our world and whatever comes after. It's drawn to places where the veil between dimensions is thin, where tragedy is about to unfold. It chooses people like me, people with just enough psychic sensitivity to receive its warnings, and it burdens us with knowledge we can't prove and responsibilities we can't escape. I'm retired now, living quietly in a cabin near Luray. But I still monitor the news, still watch for patterns that might indicate the Mothman's return. Because I know that when it appears again, and it will appear again, someone will need to listen to its warnings. Someone will need to try to save lives, even if no one believes them. If you ever find yourself driving through the Blue Ridge Mountains at night and you see red eyes watching you from the darkness, don't dismiss it as your imagination. If you hear the sound of massive wings overhead, pull over and wait for it to pass. And if you start having visions of disasters that haven't happened yet, don't ignore them. The Mothman doesn't choose its messengers lightly. If it's shown you something, it's because you're the only one who can prevent it. The question is, will you have the courage to try? My name is Isaac Mountain Hawk. I've been a park ranger for 21 years, and I've pulled more than 200 people out of caves. I know these mountains better than my own backyard. The Red River Gorge in Kentucky has been my home since I was born, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. People think being a ranger is just sitting around watching trees grow. They don't know about the cave rescues at 2 a.m., or the times you have to crawl through spaces smaller than a washing machine to reach someone who's hurt bad. I'm good at what I do because I stay calm and I don't believe in fairy tales. Never believed in devils either. Just dangerous rocks and stupid people. November 15th, 1983 started like any other day. Cold morning, ice storm coming in fast. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the phone rang. Sarah, our dispatcher, looked worried when she hung up. "We got 6 missing cavers," she said. "Spelunking club from the university. They were supposed to check in yesterday at 4 p.m. "Which cave system?" I asked, already reaching for my gear. "Devil's Backbone Ridge, the new cave they found last month." I stopped. Devil's Backbone was bad news, even on good days. Sandstone cliffs 400 feet high, limestone caves that went deeper than anyone had mapped. The Cherokee used to say that ridge was cursed, but I figured they just knew dangerous ground when they saw it. "Who's going with me?" I asked. "Danny Fletcher and Mike Torres. State Police cave team is 2 hours out." Danny was young but smart, good with ropes, and didn't panic easy. Mike had been caving for 15 years. Solid guys, both of them. We'd need to be solid for this one. The drive up to Devil's Backbone took 45 minutes on winding mountain roads. Ice was already making the asphalt slick. Danny sat in the passenger seat checking our gear, while Mike rode in back with the rescue equipment. "You ever been in that new cave?" Danny asked. "Nope. State geologist marked it last month but said it needed proper survey work first." "Maybe that's why they got in trouble," Mike said. "College kids don't know when to turn around." When we reached the trailhead, I could see the cave entrance about 200 yards up the ridge. Dark hole in the rock face, maybe 6 feet wide. The missing cavers had left their camp set up below. 6 tents, cooking gear, food still in coolers. Everything neat and organized. These weren't sloppy kids. We hiked up to the cave entrance, and I got my first look at something that made me stop cold. The rock around the opening was blackened, like from an explosion, but the blast marks pointed outward, like something had blown up from inside the cave. "What do you make of that?" Danny asked, running his hand over the charred stone. "Maybe they were using carbide lamps," I said, but I didn't believe it. I'd seen carbide accidents before. This was different. The burns went deep into solid rock. We switched on our headlamps and checked our equipment one more time. 3-point climbing harnesses, 200 feet of dynamic rope, first aid kit, and radio that would work maybe 50 feet into the cave before the rock blocked the signal. The temperature hit me as soon as we stepped inside. Should have been maybe 55 degrees, same as it always was in Kentucky caves. Instead, it felt like 75, maybe 80. Warm air was flowing up from deep in the cave, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Sweet and rotten at the same time. Feels like a sauna in here, Mike said, already sweating. Could be a hot spring somewhere down below, I said. But I'd never heard of any hot springs in this part of Kentucky. We called out for the missing cavers as we moved deeper. Our voices echoed weird in the passages, like the rock was swallowing the sound. After about 100 feet, the cave split into 3 tunnels. We found the first clue there, a piece of torn fabric stuck on a rock edge. Blue nylon, probably from someone's jacket. They went left, Danny said, pointing to boot prints in the soft cave dirt. We followed the left tunnel as it curved down and to the right. The walls got closer together, and I had to duck my head in places. 21 years of caving, and I still didn't like tight spaces much. But the warm air kept flowing past us, which meant the tunnel opened up somewhere ahead. That's when we found the first one. Jenny Martinez, 19 years old according to her student ID. She was sitting against the cave wall like she'd decided to take a rest and never woke up. No injuries I could see, no blood. She looked peaceful except for her eyes. They were wide open, staring at something that wasn't there. Mike checked for a pulse while I looked around for clues. Her gear was scattered like she'd thrown it aside in a hurry. Rope, helmet, water bottle. But her headlamp was missing. She's been dead maybe 12 hours, Mike said quietly. No obvious cause. Heart attack? Danny asked. Maybe. But look at her hands. Jenny's fingers were clawed like she'd been digging at something. Her nails were broken and bloody. But there was nothing to dig at except solid stone. I was starting to get that feeling you get when something's very wrong but you can't put your finger on what. The warm air, the blast marks, the way sounds echoed strange. And now a dead college girl with no clear reason why. We need to find the others and get out of here, I said. This place doesn't feel right. That's when Danny started screaming. Danny's scream cut through the cave like a knife. Mike and I spun around to see him backing against the wall, staring at his hands. He'd been holding his headlamp, checking the battery. Now the light was dim and flickering like it was dying. The light, he whispered. It's getting eaten. I looked at my own headlamp. Full battery when we came in, but now the beam was weak and yellow. Mike's was doing the same thing. Batteries can fail, I said, trying to keep everyone calm. We got spares. But when Danny pulled out a fresh battery, it was dead too. Stone cold dead, like something had drained all the power right out of it. That's not possible, Mike said. He was a practical guy, worked as an electrician when he wasn't caving. Batteries don't just die sitting in a pack. We had maybe 20 minutes of dim light left between the 3 of us. In normal caves, that would be plenty of time to get out. But we still hadn't found 5 missing cavers, and I was starting to think they might be deeper than we'd hoped. We keep looking, I decided, but we stay close and we move fast. The tunnel kept going down, and the walls started to change. Instead of rough limestone, the rock became smooth. Too smooth, like something had worn it down by passing over it again and again. The warm air got stronger, and with it came that sweet rotten smell. Smells like flowers, Danny said. Dead flowers. I knew that smell now. It was the same thing you smelled around old battlefields, places where lots of people had died. But what would cause that smell deep in a cave? We found the second body in a wider chamber, maybe 300 feet from the entrance. Tom Bradley, the group leader, according to his registration card. He was face down in the middle of the floor, and he'd been there longer than Jenny. When Mike turned him over, we saw why. Tom's chest was caved in like something heavy had stepped on him. But the strangest part was his face. He looked terrified, but also surprised, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing even as it killed him. What could do that? Danny asked. His voice was shaky now. I looked around the chamber with my dying headlamp. The floor was dirt and small rocks, normal cave stuff. But there were marks in the dirt that made me cold all over. Long scrapes in the ground, too wide to be from boots or any tool I knew. And they were fresh. Something big was here, I said. Something that drags when it moves. Mike was checking Tom's gear when he found something that made everything worse. The rope was cut, but not with a knife. The ends were burned through, like they'd been dipped in acid. His rope was dissolved, Mike said, showing us the burned ends. What kind of acid could do this? Maybe there's a chemical leak somewhere, I said, but I didn't believe it. There were no mines or factories for 50 miles. That's when we heard it. A sound from deeper in the cave, low and rumbling like a train far away. But trains don't hiss like angry cats, and they don't make the ground shake under your feet. Danny grabbed my arm. We need to leave, right now. I wanted to agree with him. Every instinct I had was screaming to get out of that cave. But there were still 4 people missing, and I couldn't leave them behind. Not if there was any chance they were still alive. One more chamber, I said. If we don't find them in the next chamber, we go back for help. The tunnel kept going down, twisting left and right like a snake. Our headlamps were so dim now we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The walls started to show marks I didn't like, long scratches in the stone that looked almost like claw marks. But nothing had claws that could scratch limestone. The smell was getting stronger too. Sweet and rotten and something else underneath. Something that reminded me of the sulfur springs up north, but sharper. It made my eyes water and my throat burn. We came around a bend and found ourselves in the biggest chamber yet. Our weak lights couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling, but we could see enough to know we were in trouble. The floor was covered with bones, not old bones from Native American burials or Civil War soldiers. Fresh bones with bits of meat still stuck to them. Bones from deer and rabbits and things I couldn't identify. And mixed in with the animal bones were pieces of hiking gear, backpacks, water bottles, boots. My God, Mike whispered. Danny threw up. I couldn't blame him. I wanted to throw up too, but I was too scared to move. That's when we saw the rest of the college kids. They were hanging from the ceiling like decorations, wrapped up in something that looked like spider webs but wasn't. The 3 bodies were maybe 30 feet up, too high for us to reach even with all our rope. But we could see enough to know they'd been there for a while. We're leaving, I said, right now. But when we turned around, the tunnel we'd come through was different. It looked narrower, and I couldn't see the bend where we'd turned. Our footprints in the dirt were gone, like something had smoothed them away. That's not the way we came, Danny said. Mike was shining his dying light around the chamber, looking for another way out. That's when his light caught something moving in the shadows across from us. Something big. Something that slithered when it moved. Turn off the lights, I whispered. What? Turn them off. Now. We clicked off our headlamps and stood in complete darkness. I could hear Danny breathing fast, trying not to panic. Mike was holding his breath all together, and underneath our human sounds, I could hear something else. Scraping. Like something heavy being dragged across stone. It was moving around the chamber, staying in the shadows where we couldn't see it. But whatever it was big enough to make the ground shake a little with each movement. I reached into my pack and found my emergency whistle. 3 long blasts meant we needed help fast. But would anyone hear it 300 feet underground? Before I could blow the whistle, something spoke. Not in words I recognized, but I understood it anyway, like it was talking directly into my head instead of my ears. Asterisk, welcome to my home, asterisk, it said. Asterisk, stay and feed the mountain. Asterisk, Danny started screaming again. But this time, he didn't stop. Danny's screaming filled the cave chamber, echoing off walls we couldn't see. I grabbed him and shook him hard. Stop it, I hissed. Whatever's in here, you're calling it to us. But Danny wasn't hearing me anymore. His eyes had rolled back white, and he was making sounds no human throat should make. Mike clicked his headlamp back on, and in the weak yellow light I could see Danny's mouth moving like he was speaking, but the words coming out weren't English. They weren't any language I'd ever heard. The scraping sound was getting closer. Whatever was moving around the chamber, it was taking its time, like it knew we couldn't escape and wanted to enjoy watching us panic. Danny, listen to me, I said, slapping his face. You need to snap out of this. His eyes focused on me for a second, and when he spoke, it was in his own voice again. It's in my head, he whispered. It's showing me things, terrible things. What kind of things? People, hundreds of people over the years. It brings them down here and feeds on them. Not their bodies, their fear, their pain. It keeps them alive as long as possible to make the fear last. Mike was backing toward the wall, swinging his light around the chamber. There's no way out, he said. The tunnel we came through, it's gone. I looked where he was pointing. The opening where we'd entered was solid rock now, like it had never been there at all. But that was impossible. Rock didn't just grow back together. The voice spoke in my head again, and this time it sounded amused. Asterisk. The mountain moves for me. I have been here since before your people walked upright. I will be here when your bones are dust. Asterisk. What do you want? I said out loud. Danny grabbed my arm. Don't talk to it. Don't listen to it. That's how it gets stronger. But the thing in the darkness was already stronger. I could feel it pressing against my thoughts, trying to show me the same terrible pictures it had shown Danny. Images of people dying slowly in the dark, their screams feeding something ancient and hungry. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. She was Melungeon, mixed Cherokee and European blood that went back to the first settlers. She used to say there were things in these mountains older than the Cherokee, older than anyone, things that slept in the deep places and woke up hungry. She'd taught me words to say if I ever met one of those things. I'd never believed her stories, but now I was desperate enough to try anything. I started speaking the old words, the protection prayer she'd made me memorize when I was 10 years old. The sounds felt strange in my mouth, like my tongue wasn't shaped right for them. The scraping stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Breathing that wasn't human. Slow and deep like a sleeping giant, but awake and angry. Mike's headlamp flickered and went out completely. Danny's died a few seconds later. That left just my light, so weak I could barely see my own hands. But in that dim glow, I saw it. The thing that had been hunting us was like nothing in any nightmare. It had the body of a snake, but huge, maybe 40 feet long and thick as a tree trunk. The front part rose up like a cobra, but instead of a snake's head, it had the torso of a man. A man with skin like burnt leather and eyes that glowed yellow in the dark. When it smiled, I saw teeth like broken glass. Your grandmother's words are old, it said, and this time I heard it with my ears as well as my mind. Its voice was like rocks grinding together. But I am older. The creature moved closer, and I could smell its breath. Sulfur and rotting meat and something sharp that made my eyes water. Each time it breathed out, the air shimmered like heat waves. I have eaten your people for 1,000 years, it said. Cherokee, settlers, soldiers, cavers. They all taste the same in the end, like fear and regret. Danny was on his knees now, rocking back and forth. But Mike surprised me. Instead of running or falling apart, he pulled something from his pack. A flare gun, the kind we used for emergencies. Stay back, he shouted, pointing it at the creature. The thing laughed, a sound like boulders falling down a cliff. Fire cannot hurt me, little man. I am made of fire and stone and the hunger that lives between them. But when Mike pulled the trigger, something unexpected happened. The flare hit the creature in the chest and stuck there, burning bright red. The thing didn't seem hurt, but it recoiled like it didn't like the light. In the sudden red glow, I could see the chamber clearly for the first time. We were in a natural cave room, maybe 50 feet across, with openings leading off in 4 directions. The bones on the floor weren't just from animals. There were human skulls mixed in, some of them old enough to be brown with age. And wrapped around the walls like decorations were things that had once been people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, preserved somehow in the warm air that flowed through the cave. My collection, the creature said proudly. Each one screamed so beautifully before they joined the mountain. The flare was burning down, and our world was getting darker again. But I'd seen what I needed to see. One of the tunnels leading out had moving air, and moving air meant it led somewhere. This way, I whispered to Mike and Danny. When the flare dies, run for the tunnel on the left. What about you? Mike asked. I was still holding my grandmother's words in my head, and I could feel them doing something. Not hurting the creature, but keeping it from getting into my thoughts completely. Maybe that would be enough. I'll keep it busy, I said. Get out and bring help, real help, explosives if you can get them. The flare guttered and died. In the darkness, I heard Mike dragging Danny toward the tunnel. I heard the tunnel alive toward the tunnel, the creature moving too, turning to follow them. That's when I started shouting every protection prayer my grandmother had ever taught me, as loud as I could. The creature turned back to me, its yellow eyes blazing with anger. You dare use the old words against me? I dare, I said, though my voice was shaking. My people were here before you crawled out of whatever hole you came from. It wasn't true, but the creature seemed to believe it. It reared up to its full height, and in the glow from its eyes I could see it was even bigger than I'd thought. The human part of it was scarred and twisted, with arms that ended in claws like broken metal. "Then you will die like the old ones died," it hissed, slowly and in great pain. But before it could reach me, I heard something that gave me hope. Voices. Human voices, calling my name. The state police cave team had finally arrived. The voices were coming from above us, maybe 100 feet up through solid rock. I could hear them calling for Isaac Mountain Hawk, Danny Fletcher, Mike Torres. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. But the creature heard them too, and its glowing eyes got brighter. "More food," it said, licking its lips with a tongue like a black snake. "They will come down to save you, and I will have a feast." I had to warn them somehow, but my radio was dead, and sound doesn't travel up through limestone very well. The only thing I could think of was the emergency whistle in my pack. I put it to my lips and blew 3 long blasts. The sound echoed through the chamber and up into the tunnels above. In the silence that followed, I heard the voices stop. Then they started calling louder, more urgent. "Here!" I shouted as loud as I could. "Don't come down! Dangerous!" But I knew they would come anyway. That's what cave rescue teams do. They go into danger to pull people out. It's what I would have done. The creature was moving again, flowing across the chamber, floor like water. But instead of coming for me, it was heading for one of the upper tunnels where the voices were coming from. That's when I realized something important. The thing was big and strong, but it couldn't fly. It had to travel through the cave passages like everything else. And if I could get to the right tunnel first, maybe I could warn the rescue team before it was too late. I ran. My dying headlamp threw crazy shadows on the walls as I sprinted for the tunnel where I'd heard the voices. Behind me, the creature roared with anger. The sound was like a landslide, and it made loose rocks fall from the ceiling. The tunnel I chose was narrow and steep, angling up toward the surface. I could hear voices more clearly now, at least 4 men, maybe 5. They were maybe 200 feet above me and coming down fast. "Don't come down," I screamed up the tunnel. "There's something dangerous down here." But my voice just echoed back at me. Either they couldn't hear me, or they were too far away to understand. I kept climbing, using my hands to pull myself up the steep parts. The rock was smooth here too, worn down by something that had passed this way many times over many years. I tried not to think about what had made those smooth patches. Behind me, I could hear the creature coming. It moved different in the narrow tunnel, less like flowing water and more like a freight train. The grinding sound of its body against the rock walls was getting closer. My headlamp finally died completely, leaving me in total darkness. But I kept climbing by feel, running my hands along the walls to find handholds. The tunnel was getting warmer, and I could smell fresh air mixing with the sulfur stench from below. That's when I saw lights above me. Real lights, bright and steady. The rescue team was close. "Hey!" I yelled. "Can you hear me? Isaac?" The voice belonged to Captain Morrison from the state police. "That you down there?" "Yes, but don't come any closer. The creature hit me from behind like a truck. I went flying forward, smashing into the tunnel wall hard enough to see stars. When I rolled over, it was right there above me, its yellow eyes burning in the darkness. "No more running," it hissed. But the rescue team had heard the noise. Their lights were getting brighter, and I could hear them moving fast down the tunnel toward us. "Turn around!" I screamed. "Get out of here!" Captain Morrison's voice echoed down from above. "Hold on, Isaac. We're coming." The creature smiled its terrible smile. "Yes," it said. "Come to me." That's when I made the decision that probably saved all our lives. I grabbed the creature around what passed for its waist and held on tight. "What are you doing?" it snarled, trying to shake me off. "Taking you with me," I said, and rolled sideways off the tunnel edge. We fell together into the darkness below. Not far, maybe 20 feet, but far enough to hit the chamber floor hard. The creature landed on top of me, driving all the air out of my lungs. But the impact stunned it for a few seconds, and that was enough. I rolled away and started running again, this time toward the tunnel where Mike and Danny had escaped. If I could get there, maybe I could lead the creature away from the rescue team. But the thing was faster than me, and it was angry now. Really angry. It caught up with me before I'd gone 50 feet, wrapping around my legs like a python. "Enough games," it said, lifting me up to face level. "Time to feed the mountain." I could feel its breath on my face, hot and poisonous. My vision was starting to blur, and my chest felt like it was on fire. This was how it killed people, not with claws or teeth, but with poison breath that burned you from the inside. That's when the lights hit us. 4 members of the state police cave rescue team came rappelling down into the chamber, their headlamps blazing like tiny suns. For the first time since we'd entered the cave, I could see everything clearly. The creature was even more horrible in full light. Its skin was covered with scars and burns, like it had crawled through fire to get here. Its human arms were too long and bent at wrong angles, and its face was the worst part. It looked human enough to be someone's brother or father, but the eyes were pure animal hunger. "What the hell is that thing?" one of the officers shouted. "Shoot it," another one yelled. But bullets don't work on creatures made of stone and fire and ancient hate. The shots just bounced off its hide like pebbles. The creature dropped me and turned toward the new arrivals, rearing up to its full height. "More gifts for the mountain," it said. That's when I remembered the rest of my grandmother's words. Not just the protection prayer, but the binding ritual. The way to send something like this back where it came from. I started speaking the old words again, but different ones this time. Harder words that hurt my throat to say. Words that were meant to chain monsters and lock them away from the world of living people. The creature felt it immediately. It spun around to face me, its eyes blazing brighter than ever. "You cannot bind me," it roared. "I am older than your words." But the words were working. I could see it in the way the thing moved, slower and more careful, like it was fighting against invisible chains. "Keep talking," Captain Morrison shouted. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." I kept saying the binding words, even though they felt like swallowing broken glass. The creature was fighting back now, sending waves of fear and pain into my head. I saw myself dying 100 different ways. Saw my family and friends being dragged into the cave to feed its hunger. But I also heard my grandmother's voice, speaking along with me from wherever old souls go when they die. The creature screamed, "A!" sound like the mountain itself breaking apart. And then, suddenly, it was moving backward, not walking or slithering, but being pulled by something I couldn't see. "The mountain calls," it said, and for the first time it sounded afraid. The deep places want their guardian back. It was being dragged toward one of the far tunnels, the one that went deepest into the earth. As it disappeared into the darkness, I heard its voice one last time. "I will wait," it called. "I will always wait. And someday, someone will come deep enough to wake me again." Then it was gone, and the chamber was quiet except for the sound of 5 men breathing hard and trying to understand what they'd just seen. Captain Morrison and his team got me out of that cave in less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. We found Mike and Danny about halfway to the surface, huddled together in a side passage. Danny was still mumbling in that strange language, and Mike was holding him down to keep him from clawing at his own face. They had to sedate Danny to get him calm enough to move. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, and when he came out, he couldn't remember anything that happened in the cave. The doctors said it was trauma-induced amnesia, a way for his mind to protect itself. I envied him. We never found the bodies of the 6 college kids. When the state investigators went back into the cave the next day, the chamber where we'd seen the creature was gone. Just solid rock, like it had never existed. The tunnel that led down to the deep places was sealed up tight. But I know what I saw down there, and I know that thing is still waiting. The official report said the students had fallen into an unmapped sinkhole during the ice storm. Cave-in buried them too deep to recover. The cave entrance was blasted shut and marked as geologically unstable. Nobody's allowed up there anymore. I tried to go back to work, but every time I went underground, my hands would shake and my breath would come short. Claustrophobia, the doctors called it. Panic disorder. They gave me pills and therapy sessions, but they couldn't fix what was really wrong with me. I knew that every cave in these mountains might connect to something deeper, something old and hungry that was just waiting for the right person to dig too deep or explore too far. I retired early, moved to a house in town where I can see the horizon in all directions. But sometimes at night, when the wind is blowing just right, I swear I can hear things moving under the ground. Scraping sounds, like something big dragging itself through tunnels that don't appear on any map. Mike still does cave rescue work, but he won't go deeper than 100 feet anymore. Says it's because he's getting too old for the hard climbs, but I know better. He remembers what we saw down there, even if he won't talk about it. Danny moved to Florida and got a job on a fishing boat. Says he likes being able to see the sky all day long. He sent me a letter once, just 3 words. It's still there. I know it is. The thing about creatures like that, they don't really die, and they don't give up. They just wait. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, it doesn't matter to them. Time means nothing when you're made of stone and hunger and the darkness between the stars. So I'm telling you this story for a reason. If you're the kind of person who likes to explore caves, especially in Kentucky or Tennessee or anywhere in the Appalachians, you need to be careful. Real careful. Don't go deeper than you have to. Don't follow tunnels that feel too warm or smell like sulfur. And if you ever hear something scraping in the darkness behind you, don't stop to look. Just run. Because some places in these mountains should stay sealed. Some things that sleep in the deep places should never be woken up. And if you ever find yourself in a cave where your lights start to dim for no reason, where the walls feel smooth like something big has worn them down, where you hear voices in your head speaking words you don't understand, get out. Get out fast and don't look back. The devil's backbone is still there, marked with government signs that say, "Danger, keep out." But signs don't stop people who are curious or brave or just plain stupid. I get a call about once a year from some park ranger or state trooper asking about missing cavers in that area. I always tell them the same thing. Blast the caves shut and post guards if you have to, but don't go down there looking for bodies. Because you might find something worse than bodies. You might find something that's still hungry. My name is Rebecca Oldham, and I've been a park ranger at Pisgah National Forest for 14 years. I know these North Carolina mountains like the back of my hand, every trail, every rock face, every hidden waterfall. What I didn't know was that some family stories should stay buried. I grew up hearing my grandmother's tales about mountain witches and strange happenings up on Grandfather Mountain. She'd tell me about women who could control the weather and make plants wither with a touch. Mountain magic, she called it. I got my degree in Appalachian studies and figured I knew better. Those were just old stories people told to explain things they didn't understand. The call came in on a crisp October morning in 1968. 3 hikers had reported seeing a woman in old-fashioned clothes standing at Wiseman's View, the popular overlook that sits 4,000 feet above Linville Gorge. Nothing too unusual there. Sometimes people dress up for photos or historical reenactments. But when I radioed back to ask for more details, dispatch told me something that made my coffee go cold. They said she was impossibly tall, Rebecca, like 7 feet tall, and when they tried to get closer, their cameras stopped working. I've dealt with plenty of strange reports over the years. People see bears and think they're Bigfoot. They hear owls and swear it's a banshee. But camera malfunctions? That was new. The drive up to Wiseman's View takes about 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. I knew every curve by heart. But that morning, something felt different. The trees seemed too quiet. Even the October wind had stopped blowing, leaving the colorful leaves hanging perfectly still. It reminded me of the way the air gets heavy before a bad storm. I parked at the small gravel lot and grabbed my equipment, clipboard, camera, first aid kit, and my radio. The trail to the overlook is only about a quarter mile, but it felt longer that day. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, and that was the only sound. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no buzz of insects, just my footsteps and my breathing. When I reached the wooden viewing platform, I understood why the hikers had been spooked. The temperature had dropped at least 30 degrees from where I'd parked. My breath came out in little white puffs, even though it had been a warm morning. I checked my thermometer twice, 52 degrees at the overlook, 84 degrees back at my truck. I walked to the railing and looked out over the gorge. The view always took my breath away, miles of forest spreading out like a green and gold carpet, with granite cliffs dropping straight down into the valley. But today, something was wrong with the picture. The leaves on the trees directly below the overlook had turned brown and were falling, even though it was peak autumn season and they should have been at their most beautiful. I made some notes and took pictures, trying to think of logical explanations. Maybe there was an underground spring causing temperature differences. Maybe some kind of mineral deposit was affecting the plant life. I'd seen stranger things in 14 years of ranger work. That's when I noticed the smell burning herbs, like sage and something else I couldn't name. It reminded me of my grandmother's house when she was brewing one of her tonics. The smell seemed to be coming from the trees below, but I couldn't see any smoke. I was about to head back to my truck when my radio crackled. "Rebecca, we've got another report from Wiseman's View. Local man found at the base of the overlook this morning. He's asking for you specifically." "Found how?" I asked, pressing the talk button. "Hikers spotted him about an hour ago. He's conscious but confused. Says he came up here yesterday afternoon, and it was yesterday afternoon when we found him. Problem is, Rebecca, that was 3 days ago." Dr. Harold Finch was 68 years old and had been teaching local history at Appalachian State for 30 years. I knew him from his research on Cherokee sacred sites in the area. When I found him sitting on a boulder near the base of the overlook, wrapped in an emergency blanket with 2 EMTs checking his blood pressure, he looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. "Rebecca," he said when he saw me, his voice shaky. "Thank God you're here. Something's wrong with this place. Something's very wrong." Dr. Finch had always been sharp as a tack. He could recite dates and historical facts like a computer. But the man sitting in front of me seemed confused and frightened. His hair, which had been mostly brown with some gray 3 days ago, was now completely white. Deep lines had appeared around his eyes, and his hands shook when he tried to hold his coffee cup. "Can you tell me what happened, Dr. Finch?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He stared up at the overlook, squinting like he was trying to remember something important. "I came up here Tuesday afternoon to take some photographs for my book. You know, the one about colonial-era settlements. I wanted pictures of the view for the chapter about Wiseman's settlement. Today was Friday. Tuesday had been 3 days ago. I remember setting up my camera," he continued. "The light was perfect, golden hour just before sunset, but then it got cold, impossibly cold, and I saw her." "Saw who?" "A woman. Tall, taller than any person should be. She was wearing a long gray dress, like something from the 1700s. And her eyes?" He shuddered. "Her eyes were completely black, not just dark brown, black like coal." One of the EMTs caught my attention and tapped his temple, suggesting Dr. Finch might be confused from exposure or dehydration. But I'd seen plenty of people who'd been lost in the mountains, and this felt different. "Where exactly did you see this woman?" I asked. "Doctor." Finch pointed up toward the overlook. "Right at the edge of the platform. She was just standing there, looking down at me. When I tried to take her picture, my camera died. Then my watch stopped working." He held up his wrist to show me an expensive digital watch with a blank display. "I bought this last month. It was working fine until I came up here." I helped Dr. Finch to the ambulance and watched them drive away. Then I hiked back up to the overlook, this time bringing a thermometer, a compass, and 3 different watches. I wanted to test his story about equipment malfunctions. The temperature drop was still there, even more extreme now. According to my thermometer, it was 38 degrees at the overlook and 78 degrees just 100 yards down the trail. My compass needle spun in lazy circles, unable to find magnetic north, and at exactly 4:47 p.m., all 3 of my watches stopped. I tried my radio, static. I tried my cell phone. No signal, even though I'd had full bars at the parking lot. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky orange and pink, but the temperature kept dropping. I could see frost forming on the wooden railings of the viewing platform. In October, in North Carolina, that's when I smelled the herbs again, stronger this time. And underneath that smell was something else, something rotten and old, like flowers left too long in a grave. I turned to head back down the trail, and that's when I saw them. Arrangements of plants and stones in perfect circles, hidden just inside the tree line. They hadn't been there an hour ago, I was sure of it. Someone would have had to work fast to gather all those materials and create such detailed patterns. But as I got closer, I realized the plants weren't gathered. They were still rooted in the ground, but they'd somehow grown into these unnatural shapes. Vines twisted into spirals, flowers arranged in perfect geometric patterns. And in the center of each circle, small piles of what looked like bones. I knelt down to examine one of the arrangements. The bones, they were old, yellow, and brittle, but they'd been arranged recently. Someone had taken time and care to place them just so. As I reached out to touch one, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. My breath came out in thick white clouds. The frost on the trees around me began spreading. coating leaves and branches with ice that crackled as it formed. And from somewhere behind me came a sound that made my blood freeze. Footsteps on the wooden platform above. Slow, measured footsteps, like someone wearing heavy boots. But I was alone up here. I was sure I was alone. I stood up slowly and turned around. The overlook was empty, but the footsteps continued, pacing back and forth across the platform with deliberate rhythm. And with each step, the temperature dropped a little more. I backed away from the overlook, keeping my eyes on the empty platform. The footsteps stopped. The forest went completely silent. No wind, no insects, no birds. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. That's when I saw her. Just a glimpse, there and gone like a trick of the dying light, a figure in gray standing at the far edge of the platform. Tall, impossibly tall, just like Dr. Finch had said. For 1 second, she was there. The next second, empty air. But the temperature kept dropping, and the smell of herbs and death grew stronger. I ran. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tall gray figure and felt the unnatural cold creeping into my bones. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just stress and imagination. 14 years as a ranger, and I'd never believed in ghost stories. I wasn't about to start now, but when I got to work, there were 3 more incident reports on my desk. A family from Georgia had found their car covered in frost on Wednesday morning in the parking lot at Wiseman's View in 75-degree weather. Their photos showed thick ice coating every surface of their SUV, but the ice had melted by the time they got to the ranger station. A group of college students reported that their compasses had all started spinning wildly when they got within a mile of the overlook. One girl's GPS unit had shown their elevation as negative 4,000 feet, as if they were somehow underground. And a local man named Tom Bradley had called to report finding dead animals arranged in patterns near the trail. Looked like something made circles out of rabbits and squirrels, he'd told dispatch. All arranged neat and tidy, like someone was trying to send a message. I radioed my supervisor, Jack Morrison, and asked if I could bring in some help. "What kind of help?" he asked. "Someone who knows about local history, maybe Cherokee folklore. There's something happening up there that I can't explain with normal ranger training." Jack was quiet for a moment. "You talking about bringing in one of those ghost hunter types?" "No," I said. "I'm talking about Dr. James Whitaker from UNC. He's an anthropologist who specializes in Appalachian folklore. And maybe Joseph Crowfeather from the Cherokee Reservation. If there's some historical significance to this place that we don't know about, they might be able to help." 2 hours later, both men were sitting in my office. Dr. Whitaker was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who kept adjusting his glasses. Joseph Crowfeather was older, maybe 70, with long gray hair and calm, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. "I've been researching these mountains for 20 years, Doctor," Whitaker said, flipping through a folder of papers. "Wiseman's View is named after a colonial settler named Jeremiah Wiseman. He built a homestead near the overlook in 1781. "What happened to him?" I asked. Dr. Whitaker exchanged a glance with Joseph. "The settlement didn't last long. According to court records, there were accusations of witchcraft in 1782. A woman named Constance Blackwood was put on trial." "Let me guess," I said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "She was executed at the overlook." Joseph spoke for the first time, his voice low and serious. "My great-grandfather told stories about that place. He said the Cherokee avoided it even before the white settlers came. Called it the place where the earth bleeds. Something about the land itself being wounded." "Wounded how?" "Old violence," Joseph said. "The kind that soaks into the ground and never leaves. When people are killed in anger or fear, especially innocent people, the land remembers." Dr. Whitaker pulled out a photocopy of an old document. According to the trial records, Constance Blackwood was accused of causing crop failures and livestock deaths. She was also accused of being unnaturally tall and having eyes like coal. Sound familiar? My mouth went dry. "They executed her for being tall?" "They executed her for being different," Joseph said. "And for being a woman who knew things about plants and healing that scared them." The trial lasted 1 day. They hanged her at sunset from a tree at the overlook. "But here's the interesting part," Dr. Whitaker added. "The tree they hanged her from was struck by lightning that same night. Split right down the middle. And according to witness accounts, it happened during a clear, cloudless night. I thought about the impossible frost, the broken equipment, the temperature drops. You think her spirit is still there? Joseph stood up and walked to my window, looking out toward the mountains. Some spirits move on when they die. Others get trapped by strong emotions, anger, fear, injustice. If she was innocent, if she died angry and afraid, she could be bound to the place where she was killed, Dr. Whitaker finished. But why now? I asked. Why is she becoming active after almost 200 years? Joseph turned back to face me, and his expression was troubled. What's your family name, Rebecca? Oldham, Rebecca Oldham. Your grandmother's maiden name? I felt a strange cold creeping up my spine. Blackwood, Sarah Blackwood. The room went completely silent. Dr. Whitaker's face went pale, and Joseph nodded slowly like he'd expected this answer. That's why she's calling to you, Joseph said. Your family. You carry the blood of the woman they murdered. And if the old stories are true, if Constance really was a woman of power, then you might have inherited more than just her name. Before I could ask what he meant, my radio crackled. Rebecca, we've got a situation at Wiseman's View. Multiple hikers reporting equipment failures and unusual sightings. Can you get up there right away? I looked at Dr. Whitaker and Joseph. Want to come meet your 200-year-old witch? The drive up the mountain was different this time. With each mile, the radio static got worse. Dr. Whitaker's tape recorder stopped working. Joseph's cell phone screen went black, and the temperature gauge in my truck started dropping, even though the heater was running full blast. When we reached the parking lot, we found 6 cars and a small crowd of confused hikers. A family from Tennessee was standing next to their minivan, which was covered in a thick layer of ice. A group of college kids were huddled together, sharing blankets, and an elderly couple was sitting in their car with the engine running, refusing to get out. It's 40 degrees up there, one of the college students told me, in the middle of the day, and there's a woman walking around in old-fashioned clothes. She keeps appearing and disappearing like she's not really there. How tall is this woman? Joseph asked. The student looked confused. That's the weird part. Sometimes she looks normal-sized. Sometimes she looks like she's 8 or 9 feet tall, like she's getting bigger. Joseph and Dr. Whitaker exchanged worried looks. She's getting stronger, Joseph said, quietly. The more people see her, the more afraid they become, the stronger she gets. As if summoned by his words, a scream came from the direction of the overlook. A woman's voice, high and terrified, echoing off the mountain walls. We ran. The scene at Wiseman's View was like something out of a nightmare. 2 hikers, a man and woman in their 30s, were pressed against the wooden railing of the platform, staring in terror at something we couldn't see. The woman was the one screaming. The man was trying to pull her away from the edge, but she seemed frozen in place. The temperature was below freezing now. Ice was forming on every surface, and our breath came out in thick white clouds. But it wasn't the cold that made my skin crawl, it was the wrongness in the air, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Where is she? I called to the hikers. The woman pointed toward the center of the platform with a shaking hand. Right there. Can't you see her? She's right there. I looked where she was pointing and saw nothing but empty air. But Dr. Whitaker grabbed my arm. Look at the ice, he whispered. The frost on the wooden platform was forming patterns, spirals, and circles that matched the plant arrangements I'd found the day before. And in the center of the largest spiral, footprints were appearing in the ice. Large footprints, like someone wearing heavy boots. But there was no one there to make them. Joseph pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch tied with sinew. He opened it and began sprinkling what looked like tobacco and herbs around the platform's edges, speaking in Cherokee in a low, urgent voice. What's he doing, Doctor? Whitaker asked. Protection ritual, I said, remembering my grandmother's stories, trying to keep her contained. But as Joseph worked, the temperature dropped even more. The ice on the railings began cracking with sharp sounds like gunshots, and the footprints in the frost were getting deeper, as if whatever was making them was becoming more solid. That's when I saw her. She appeared slowly, like a photograph developing. First, just a gray shadow, then the outline of a woman, then solid flesh and bone. She was tall, impossibly tall, just like the stories said. At least 7 feet, maybe 8. Her dress was gray wool, long-sleeved and high-necked, like something from colonial times. Her hair was dark and hung loose around her shoulders, but it was her eyes that made my blood freeze. Completely black, like holes burned into her face. And when she looked at me, I felt like she was seeing straight through to my soul. "Rebecca Oldham," she said, and her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Sarah's granddaughter, you carry my sister's blood." "Constance," I whispered. She smiled, and her teeth were too sharp. "They killed me for knowing the old ways, for helping their sick children with herbs when their doctors failed, for being tall and different and unafraid." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. But they could not kill what I knew. They could not kill the power in my blood. The two hikers finally broke free from whatever had been holding them and ran down the trail. I could hear them crashing through the trees, desperate to get away. But I couldn't move. Neither could Dr. Whitaker. Joseph continued his ritual, but his hands were shaking now. "For 200 years I have been bound to this place," Constance continued, growing taller as she spoke. Now she had to be 9 feet tall, her head nearly touching the tree branches above the platform. "Bound by their fear and hatred. But you can set me free." "How?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Give me your fear," she said, stepping closer. "Give me your terror, your despair, your life force. Let me feel what it's like to be alive again, just for a moment. Then I can leave this place and find them. Find the descendants of the men who killed me." Ice was spreading from her footsteps across the entire platform. The wooden railings were cracking from the cold, and I could feel something pulling at me, not physically, but something deeper, like she was trying to reach inside my mind. "No," Joseph said, finishing his ritual and stepping between us. "That's not the way. Rebecca, listen to me. You have the power to send her on, not by feeding her anger, but by breaking the binding that holds her here. I don't know how. Your grandmother did. Sarah Blackwood knew the old ways too. She taught you, even if you don't remember." Constance laughed, and the sound made icicles form on the tree branches. "The old Cherokee thinks he can stop me with tobacco and prayers, but I am stronger now than I was in life. I have fed on fear and anger for 2 centuries. She reached toward me with one pale hand, and where her fingers passed through the air, frost formed in spirals. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, but it wasn't just physical cold. It was the cold of the grave, of death, of 200 years of rage and loneliness. "Rebecca," Dr. Whitaker said urgently, "in my research I found mentions of counter-rituals, ways to break supernatural bindings. It requires someone of the same bloodline too." But Constance moved faster than anything human should be able to move. One moment she was 10 feet away, the next her cold fingers were wrapped around my throat. Her black eyes were inches from mine, and I could smell the grave dirt and decay on her breath. "Give me your life," she whispered. "Let me be warm again." I tried to speak, tried to breathe, but her grip was like ice-cold steel. The world was starting to go gray around the edges, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear my grandmother's voice, singing an old song in words I didn't recognize. Mountain magic, the old ways. I stopped fighting and let the song fill my mind. My grandmother's voice, strong and clear, singing words that meant protection, cleansing, peace. And suddenly I understood what Joseph meant. I did know the old ways. They'd been passed down through stories and songs, through bloodline and memory. "Constance," I whispered through her grip, "you're not evil. You're just hurt. You're just tired. It's time to rest." Her black eyes flickered, and for a moment I saw something else there, not anger, but sadness. Deep, endless sadness. "I can't rest," she said. "I can't leave. The binding holds me here." "Then I'll break it," I said, not with fear or anger, but with forgiveness. "I forgive them for what they did to you, and I forgive you for what you're doing now." The song in my mind grew stronger. My grandmother's voice was joined by other voices, women who had come before, who had known the old ways, who had kept the ancient knowledge alive through generations of persecution and fear. Constance's grip loosened. The terrible cold began to recede, and slowly, very slowly, she began to shrink back to human size. "You would really forgive them?" she asked. "After what they did?" "I forgive them," I said, "and I set you free. Rest now, Constance. Go where you were meant to go 200 years ago." She looked at me for a long moment, and the blackness in her eyes faded to brown. Human brown. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she was gone. Not disappeared, gone. The terrible cold lifted, the ice melted away. The wrongness in the air faded like a bad dream. Joseph was smiling. Dr. Whitaker was frantically taking notes. And I was standing on a perfectly normal wooden platform, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. The official report said that unusual mineral deposits in the area had been causing equipment malfunctions and temperature anomalies. We recommended that visitors be warned about potential compass and electronic issues, and suggested bringing extra layers in the case of unexpected weather changes. Nobody questioned it. People believe what they want to believe, and the truth about Constance Blackwood was too strange for most folks to handle. But I knew better now. I understood that my grandmother's stories hadn't been superstition, they'd been warnings. Lessons. Preparation for a responsibility I never knew I'd inherited. 3 weeks after the incident at Wiseman's View, Joseph Crowfeather came to visit me at the ranger station. He brought a leather journal filled with handwritten notes and sketches. My great-grandfather kept records, he said. Stories about other places in these mountains where the earth remembers old violence, places where spirits might be trapped, waiting for someone with the right bloodline to set them free. I flipped through the journal, seeing mentions of abandoned settlements, forgotten graveyards, sites where Cherokee people had been murdered by early colonists, places where tragedy had soaked into the ground and never healed. "How many?" I asked. "In these mountains alone, maybe a dozen. But there are other mountain ranges, other places where the old people settled and suffered and died angry." Joseph looked out my window toward the peaks. "The work isn't finished, Rebecca. Constance was just the beginning." Dr. Whitaker had left for UNC the week before, taking with him enough material for 3 research papers on regional folklore and historical trauma. He'd given me his contact information and asked me to call if anything else unusual happened. I had a feeling I'd be calling him again soon. That night, I drove up to Wiseman's View one more time. The platform was empty and peaceful, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and autumn leaves. The temperature was perfectly normal. My equipment worked fine, but as I stood at the railing, looking out over the gorge, I felt something I'd never felt before, a connection to the mountain itself, to the land, and its history and its hidden memories. I could sense other places where old pain lingered, other spirits who might be waiting for someone to help them find peace. My grandmother had known about this responsibility. She'd tried to prepare me with her stories, even when I refused to listen. Now I understood why she'd always looked sad when she talked about the old ways. It wasn't just knowledge she'd been trying to pass on, it was a calling. I pulled out my cell phone and called Joseph. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him. "About the other places. I want to help." "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied. "There's a place about 50 miles north of here, near Boone. Settlers built a church there in 1789, right on top of a Cherokee sacred site. People have been reporting strange voices in the woods for decades." "What kind of voices?" "Singing," Joseph said. "Cherokee death songs. But the records show that anyone who knew those songs died in the smallpox epidemic of 1783. I looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, in the ancient mountains that had witnessed centuries of joy and sorrow, other spirits were waiting. Other stories needed to be heard. Other wrongs needed to be set right. "When do we start?" I asked. The mountains stretched out before me in the moonlight, beautiful and mysterious and full of secrets. I was Rebecca Oldham, park ranger and keeper of old stories. And I finally understood that some family legends were meant to be lived, not just remembered. The wind picked up, carrying with it the whisper of voices from long ago, Cherokee and colonist, victim and survivor, all the people who had loved these mountains and suffered in them and left their marks on the eternal stone. I was listening now, and I was ready to help them find their way home. My name is William Ashcroft, and I've been a park ranger at New River Gorge for 19 years. Before that, I spent 15 years underground, digging coal out of these same West Virginia mountains. I know these mines better than most folks know their own backyards. People always ask me if I believe in ghosts. Used to be, I'd laugh and tell them the only thing haunting these old mines was bad air and loose rocks. I figured all those stories about spirits in the tunnels were just scared miners letting their minds play tricks on them in the dark. I don't laugh anymore. It was January 1989, coldest winter we'd had in 20 years. Snow was piled 3 feet deep, and the temperature hadn't gotten above zero in a week. Most of the old mining roads were blocked, making the abandoned sites even more cut off than usual. That's when the call came in. "Bill, we got a problem up at the old Thurman complex," my supervisor said over the radio. 3 college kids went in there yesterday, filming some kind of documentary. They were supposed to come out this morning, but their car's still there, and nobody's seen them. I knew the place. The Thurman mine had been shut down since 1937, when a cave-in killed 47 miners. The company said it was an accident, but my dad always told me different. He said those men died because the bosses cared more about coal than safety. "I'll head up there," I told him. "Probably just got lost in the tunnels. Happens all the time with these urban explorers." I loaded my truck with rope, flashlights, and emergency gear. The drive up the mountain took an hour through the snow. When I got there, I found their car, a beat-up Honda with Ohio plates, sitting alone in the parking area. The doors were unlocked, and their camera equipment was still inside. That should have been my first warning. I put on my hard hat and checked my equipment. The methane detector was working fine, showing normal readings. My flashlight was bright and strong. Everything looked good to go. The mine entrance was a black hole cut into the mountainside, with old railroad tracks leading into the darkness. Icicles hung down like teeth. I'd been in this mine before for safety inspections, but something felt different this time. The air was too still, too quiet. I called out, "Hello, Park Service. Anyone in there?" My voice echoed back, but there was no answer. I stepped inside and turned on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, showing the old wooden supports and rusty rail tracks. The air smelled like coal dust and something else, something sweet and rotten. As I walked deeper, I noticed fresh footprints in the coal dust on the floor. 3 sets, just like there should be, but there was something wrong. Mixed in with the sneaker prints were other marks, boot prints that looked old-fashioned, like the kind miners wore 50 years ago. I told myself it was probably just other explorers who'd been there before. But the prints looked fresh, like they'd been made yesterday. The tunnel split into 2 paths, about 100 yards in. I shined my light down both ways, trying to figure out which way the kids had gone. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Coal dust was floating in the air, fresh coal dust, like someone had just been digging. But this mine had been sealed for over 50 years. There was no way anyone could be mining here. No way at all. I checked my methane detector again. The needle was jumping around like crazy, but when I breathed in, the air seemed fine. No gas smell, no burning in my lungs. The machine had to be broken. I decided to follow the footprints down the left tunnel. The wooden supports creaked and groaned as I passed under them, and water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead. My flashlight beam seemed dimmer somehow, like the darkness was pushing back against it. That's when I heard it. Tap, 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 the sound of a pickaxe hitting rock, coming from deep in the mine. Someone was digging down there. Someone was working. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello, this is Park Ranger Ashcroft. You need to come out now. This mine isn't safe." The tapping stopped. Everything went dead silent. Then I heard voices, men talking in low, tired voices. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded sad, like they were discussing bad news. I started walking toward the voices, following the old rail tracks. My boots crunched on coal pieces and made little echoes that seemed too loud. The temperature was dropping, and I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. The voices got a little clearer as I got closer. They were talking about someone named Tommy and how his wife was going to take the news. They mentioned something about the roof being bad, about the foreman not listening to warnings. It sounded like miners talking after an accident. But there were no miners here. This place had been empty for decades. I turned a corner and saw light ahead, the warm, flickering light of carbide lamps. For a second, I felt relieved. The college kids must have found some old mining equipment and gotten it working. But as I got closer, I realized the light wasn't coming from ahead of me. It was coming from a side tunnel that I knew was completely caved in. a tunnel that had been sealed since the 1937 disaster. I stopped walking and listened hard. The voices were clearer now, and what I heard made my hands shake. "Roof's coming down," one voice said. "We ain't getting out of here." "My Mary's gonna wonder where I am," said another. "Promised her I'd be home for supper." 47 of us, a third voice whispered. 47 good men, and they'll say it was our fault. I knew those numbers. I knew that story. Those were the miners who died in 1937, and they were talking like it just happened. I stood there in the tunnel, my heart beating so hard I could hear it echoing off the walls. The voices kept talking, but they were getting fainter, like the speakers were moving away. The warm light from the sealed tunnel flickered and went out. I was alone in the dark again. My hands were shaking as I checked my equipment. The methane detector was still going crazy, but everything else seemed fine. I had to keep looking for those college kids. That was my job. But I couldn't stop thinking about those voices. I kept following the footprints deeper into the mine. The tunnel sloped downward, and I could hear water running somewhere below. The air got colder with every step, and that sweet, rotten smell got stronger. About a quarter-mile in, I found their first piece of equipment, a video camera lying on its side next to the tracks. The lens was cracked, but it was still running. I picked it up and hit the playback button. The screen showed shaky footage of 3 college-age kids walking through the same tunnel I was in. They were laughing and joking around, talking about how cool it was to explore a real mine. The picture quality was good, and I could see everything clearly. Then, about halfway through the recording, one of them stopped. "Did you guys hear that?" he said. "Hear what?" asked the girl with the camera. Sounded like someone working down there, like digging. They listened for a minute, but the camera didn't pick up any sound. The kid shrugged, and they kept walking. But I knew what he'd heard. The same tapping I'd heard. I fast-forwarded through more footage of them walking and talking. Then the picture started getting weird. The camera picked up lights in tunnels that should have been empty, to the same warm, flickering lights I'd seen. The kids didn't seem to notice them. Near the end of the recording, the camera caught something that made me drop it. In the background, just at the edge of the light, there were people. Men in old mining clothes, carrying pickaxes and shovels. They were walking parallel to the kids, moving through a tunnel that I knew was blocked off. The college kids never saw them. The camera hit the ground with a crash, and the recording stopped. I picked it up with trembling hands and kept walking. The footprints were getting fresher, and I started finding more of their stuff. A water bottle here, a notebook there. It was like they were dropping things as they went. The main tunnel curved to the right and opened into a bigger area, room, what miners call a room. This was where they used to dig out the coal, leaving behind a space about as big as a basketball court. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls. In the middle of the room, I found their camp. They'd set up a sleeping bag and some food, like they were planning to spend the night, but everything was scattered around, like they'd left in a hurry. The sleeping bag was torn, and there were dark stains on it that looked like blood. I called out again, my voice echoing in the big space. "Hello, are you hurt? I'm here to help." No answer. But I could hear something, a sound like crying, coming from the far side of the room. I walked toward it, my light cutting through the darkness. The crying got louder, but it didn't sound quite right. It sounded too deep, too old, like it was coming from someone who'd been crying for a very long time. That's when I saw him. A man was sitting against the far wall with his back to me. He was wearing old mining clothes, the kind with suspenders and a cloth cap. His shoulders were shaking like he was sobbing. "Sir?" I called out. "Are you okay? I'm a park ranger." He didn't answer, just kept crying. I got closer and reached out to touch his shoulder. "Sir, I need you to." He turned around. His face was crushed on one side, like he'd been hit by falling rock. Coal dust covered his skin, and his eyes were completely black. Not just the different pupils, but the whole eye, like they were filled with coal. He looked at me and opened his mouth. When he spoke, coal dust poured out instead of words. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking. The man stood up, and I could see that his body was all wrong, bent and broken in places where no person should bend. Then I heard more crying. All around the room, shapes were moving in the darkness. Men in mining clothes, all of them hurt, all of them broken, all of them dead. I ran. I don't remember much about getting out of that room. I just remember running as fast as I could, my light bouncing everywhere, while behind me the crying turned into something worse, a sound like 47 men screaming at once. I made it back to the main tunnel and kept running until I couldn't breathe anymore. When I finally stopped, I was almost back to the entrance. I could see daylight ahead, real, normal daylight that meant safety and sanity. But I couldn't leave. Those college kids were still down there somewhere, and it was my job to find them. I sat down on an old railroad tie and tried to think. My training told me that what I'd seen wasn't real, probably just oxygen deprivation, making me hallucinate. Mines could be dangerous that way, but the camera footage was real. The broken equipment was real, and somewhere down there 3 people were missing. I checked my radio, but I was too deep in the mountain to get a signal. I was on my own. I took a deep breath and stood up. I had to keep looking, but this time I was going to try the right tunnel. The right fork of the mine led to the old elevator shaft, a vertical tunnel that went down about 200 feet to the deeper levels. If the kids had fallen down there, they'd need medical attention fast. As I walked down the tunnel, I noticed that my footsteps were echoing wrong. Instead of one set of footsteps, it sounded like several people were walking with me. I stopped and listened, but the other footsteps stopped too. When I started walking again, they started again. I was not alone down there. The tunnel ended at the elevator shaft, a square hole in the floor with rusty cables hanging down into the darkness. A wooden barrier had been built around it, but someone had torn a gap in the boards just big enough for a person to squeeze through. I shined my light down the shaft. About 50 feet down, I could see something white. It looked like clothing. "Hello?" I yelled down the shaft. "Can you hear me?" A voice came back, weak and scared. "Help! Please help us!" It was one of the college kids. They were alive. But as I got my rope ready to rappel down, I heard something else from the shaft. More voices, talking in low, sad tones. The same voices I'd heard before, and they were saying something that made my blood freeze. "Don't go down there, son. That's where we died. That's where they left us to die." I clipped my rope to a solid beam and checked it twice. The voice from below had gone quiet, but I knew someone was down there. Someone alive. As I rappelled down the shaft, my flashlight showed me the elevator cage about 100 feet down, a twisted wreck of metal that had crashed to the bottom decades ago. The college kids must have tried to climb down and gotten trapped. Halfway down, I stopped. There was writing on the shaft wall, carved into the rock. Old writing, done with pickaxes or knives. Names and dates from 1937. The names of the miners who died. And at the bottom of the list, in fresher carving, were 3 new names. The names of the missing college students. But they weren't dead yet. I could still hear one of them crying softly below. I kept going down. The temperature dropped with every foot, and that rotten smell got so strong I had to breathe through my mouth. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in another tunnel, this one half flooded with black water. The elevator, a cage was there, crushed and twisted, and inside it, I found 2 of the college kids. They were dead, had been for at least a day, from the look of it, but they hadn't died from the fall. Their bodies were crushed, like they'd been squeezed by giant hands, and their eyes were gone, just empty, black sockets. I heard splashing behind me and turned around. The 3rd kid, a girl about 20, was wading through the black water toward me. She was crying and shaking, and her clothes were torn. "Thank God," she whispered. "I thought no one would find me." "Are you hurt?" I asked, shining my light on her. She looked okay, except for some cuts and bruises. "I don't think so. But my friends..." She looked at the crushed bodies in the elevator cage and started crying harder. "What happened here?" I asked. "We were exploring, and Jake thought he heard voices down here. We tried to use the elevator cables to climb down, but they broke. Mike and Sarah fell into the cage. I was lucky. I landed in the water." That made sense. Horrible, but it made sense. "But that's not the worst part," she said. "There are people down here, dead people. They've been trying to get me to stay with them." I helped her toward the shaft, where my rope was waiting. "You're in shock," I told her. "Let's get you out of here, and we'll send a team for your friends." But as we reached the rope, The water around us started moving. Not flowing, moving, like something big was swimming underneath. Then hands reached up out of the water. Dozens of hands, all wearing the cotton gloves that miners used to wear. They grabbed at our legs, trying to pull us down into the black water. The girl screamed and climbed onto my back. I kicked at the hands, but there were too many of them. For every one I knocked away, 2 more reached up. They want us to stay, the girl sobbed. They keep saying they're lonely, that the company left them down here to die. More hands came up, and now I could see arms attached to them. Then faces, floating just under the surface of the water. The faces of the 47 miners who died in 1937. But they weren't really faces anymore. They were just suggestions of faces, made out of coal dust and water and rage. Their mouths moved like they were trying to talk, but only black water came out. I grabbed the rope and started climbing, the girl hanging onto my back. The hands followed us up, reaching higher and higher. Cold fingers touched my boots, my legs, trying to get a grip. "Climb!" I yelled. "Don't look down!" We made it about 20 feet up before the rope went slack. Something had cut it above us. We fell back into the water with a splash. The dead miners were all around us now, their coal-black eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. They moved through the water like it was air, reaching for us with those terrible hands. One of them, a man with half his skull caved in, grabbed my wrist. When he touched me, I could suddenly hear his thoughts. Asterisk, they said we were careless. Said we didn't follow safety rules. But we told them the roof was bad. We told them the supports were wrong. They didn't listen. They never listened. Asterisk 47, good men died for their greed. 47 families got nothing but lies. Asterisk, now you work for them. You wear their uniform. You follow their rules. Asterisk, stay with us, die with us, show them what they did. Asterisk. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. More hands grabbed my legs, my arms. They were pulling me down into the water, and I couldn't fight them all. The girl was screaming beside me, her own struggles getting weaker as more miners held her. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about some college kids getting lost. This was about justice, about truth, about 47 men who died because their bosses cared more about coal than human life. "I know what happened to you," I said to the miner holding my wrist. "I know they lied about the accident." The pulling stopped. The miners all turned to look at me with their coal-black eyes. "My father worked these mines," I continued. "He told me the truth about 1937, about how the company ignored the safety warnings, about how they covered it up afterward." The miner's grip loosened slightly. "But killing us won't fix it," I said. "Keeping us down here won't bring you justice." Asterisk, then what will? Asterisk, the thought came into my head from all of them at once, like a chorus of angry voices. "The truth," I said. "People need to know what really happened. The families of the miners who died, they deserve to know it wasn't their fault." The miners looked at each other. In the dim light of my flashlight, I could see them having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, the one holding me spoke, and this time I could hear his voice out loud. It sounded like wind blowing through broken stones. "You promise? You'll tell them?" "I promise." "You'll make them pay?" "I'll try." The hands released us. The miners stepped back, still watching us with those terrible black eyes. A new rope dropped down from above, thick, strong rope that hadn't been there before. "Go," the miner said. "But remember your promise. If you lie to us, if you fail us, we'll come for you. Death can't stop us anymore." I grabbed the rope and helped the girl climb up first. As we ascended, I looked back one last time. The miners were still there, standing in the black water, watching us go. At the surface, the girl and I collapsed in the snow outside the mine entrance. She was in shock, barely able to speak. I called for backup on my radio and told them we had 2 fatalities and 1 survivor. I didn't tell them about the rest of it. Not yet. But I kept my promise to the miners. That was just the beginning. The official report said that Mike and Sarah died from injuries sustained in an accidental fall down the elevator shaft. The girl, her name was Jennifer, was treated for shock and hypothermia. She tried to tell the doctors about the dead miners, but they said it was trauma-induced hallucinations. I didn't contradict their report. Not at first, but I started researching. I went to the local historical society, the library, even interviewed some of the old-timers who remembered the 1937 disaster. What I found made me sick. The company had known the mine was dangerous. Engineers had filed reports about unstable roof supports and dangerous gas levels. Workers had complained repeatedly about safety violations. But coal prices were high in 1937, and the bosses wanted to keep production moving. On the day of the accident, 23 miners had refused to go into the dangerous section. The foreman fired them all and sent in a new crew, 47 men who needed the work too badly to complain. The roof came down at 2:47 p.m. The company said it was an act of God, an unforeseeable tragedy. They blamed the miners for not following proper safety procedures. The families got nothing but a $100 burial allowance. I took my research to the local newspaper, but they weren't interested. Ancient history, the editor said. Besides, that mining company's got a lot of lawyers. That night, I had a visitor. I was at home, reading through more old documents, when my lights started flickering. The temperature in my house dropped about 20 degrees in the span of a minute. Then I heard the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from my basement. I grabbed a flashlight and went down to investigate. The basement was empty, but there were coal smudges on the concrete floor. Fresh coal smudges, arranged in a pattern. Numbers. 47. The tapping came again, and this time I could tell it was coming from inside the walls, like someone was trying to dig their way out. I'm working on it, I said to the empty basement, but it takes time. The tapping stopped. Over the next few weeks, I kept digging into the story. I found the original engineering reports, buried in state archives. I tracked down the descendants of the miners who died. I gathered enough evidence to prove that the 1937 disaster was caused by corporate negligence, not worker error. But every newspaper, every TV station, every reporter I contacted said the same thing. Not interested. Too old. Can't prove anything. That's when the miners got impatient. Strange accidents started happening around town. A coal truck lost its brakes and crashed into the offices of the mining company's law firm. A gas leak destroyed the building where the company kept its old records. The current mine superintendent's car broke down in the middle of nowhere, and he had to walk 15 miles in a snowstorm. Nobody got seriously hurt, but the message was clear. Then Jennifer called me. She was back at college in Ohio, but she'd been having nightmares every night since the mine incident. They're in my dreams, she said. The dead miners. They keep asking if you've told their story yet. I'm trying, I told her, but nobody wants to listen. They're getting angry. Last night, one of them said they might have to come get you if you don't hurry up. That night, I made a decision. I drove back to the mine, alone. It was late March now, and most of the snow had melted. I parked at the entrance and walked into the tunnel without any equipment except a flashlight. I'm here, I called out. We need to talk. They were waiting for me in the same room where I'd first seen them. All 47 miners, standing in a circle around the old campsite. In the center of the circle was a pile of documents, the original safety reports, the engineers' warnings, the company memos that proved they knew the mine was dangerous. Where did you get these? I asked. The lead miner, the one with the crushed face, stepped forward. We've timed 4. We've been collecting them. Every document that proves what they did to us. We've had over 50 years to gather evidence. This is incredible. This proves everything. But no one will publish your story, he said. No one wants to hear the truth. So what do you want me to do? Make them listen, another miner said. Make them pay attention. How? The miners looked at each other, then back at me. There are other mines, the leader said. Other accidents. Other cover-ups. We've been talking to the dead from all over these mountains. What are you saying? We're saying that if the living won't listen to the truth, maybe they need to hear it from the dead. That's when I understood what they were planning, and I knew I had to stop them. If you hurt innocent people, you're no better than the bosses who killed you, I said. Innocent? The miner's voice rose to a roar. Where were the innocent people when we died? Where were they when our families starved? Where were they when the company lied about what happened to us? The other miners started moving closer, their coal-black eyes burning with rage. The temperature in the room plummeted, and frost started forming on the walls. "You made us a promise," the leader said. "You swore you'd get us justice. But you've failed. Just like everyone else failed us. I haven't failed. I just need more time." "Time?" He laughed, and it sounded like rocks falling. "We've been waiting 52 years. How much more time do you need?" That's when I played my last card. What if I could get your story to the right people? What if I could make sure the whole world knows what happened to you? How? There's a young reporter at the Charleston paper. She specializes in corporate corruption stories. If I can get her to investigate this, if I can show her the evidence you've collected. The miners considered this. And if she doesn't believe you, then I'll keep trying. I'll find someone who will listen. But I need you to give me time, and I need you to promise you won't hurt anyone. The leader was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. 1 month, he said. You have 1 month to get our story told. If you fail, we'll take justice into our own hands. Deal. As I left the mine that night, I carried a box full of documents that had been hidden for over 50 years. Documents that would finally reveal the truth about the 1937 disaster. But I also carried the knowledge that, if I failed, 47 angry spirits would be unleashed on the living world, and they wouldn't be satisfied with just tapping on the walls. It took me 3 weeks to convince reporter Sarah Chen to meet with me. When I spread the documents out on her desk at the Charleston Gazette, I watched her expression change from skepticism to amazement to outrage. "This is incredible," she said, reading through an internal company memo that explicitly warned about roof instability in the section where the miners died. They knew. They absolutely knew this was going to happen. "Can you publish it?" I asked. "Are you kidding? This is the story of the year. Corporate murder disguised as industrial accident? Hell yes, I can publish this." The story ran on the front page 3 days later. Then the wire services picked it up. Then the national papers. Within a week, the 1937 Thurman mine disaster was front-page news across the country. The mining company tried to fight back, claiming the documents were forgeries. But forensic analysis proved they were authentic. Worse for the company, Sarah's investigation uncovered similar cover-ups at 6 other mines between 1920 and 1950. The families of the dead miners filed a class action lawsuit. The state attorney general opened a criminal investigation. Congress announced hearings on historical mining safety violations. I went back to the mine on the 1-month anniversary of my deal with the miners. They were waiting for me, but they looked different. Calmer. More at peace. "You kept your promise," the leader said. "The truth is finally out. Your families know you weren't at fault," I told him. "The whole world knows what really happened." "We can rest now," another miner said. "For the first time in 52 years, we can rest." They began to fade as I watched, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone entirely. The coal dust that had clung to their ghostly forms scattered on a wind that shouldn't have existed underground. Only the leader remained. "Thank you," he said, "for keeping your word." "Thank you," I replied, "for teaching me that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how impossible they seem." He smiled, the first time I'd seen any of them smile, and then he was gone too. I quit the Park Service 6 months later. The mine experience had changed me in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. I used my settlement money from a book deal about the case to start a foundation that investigates historical mining accidents. We've uncovered dozens of cover-ups, helped families get closure, and forced companies to acknowledge their past crimes. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear tapping in my walls. Not angry tapping, hopeful tapping. The sound of other spirits, other victims, trying to tell their stories. And I listen, because I learned something important in that mine. The dead don't rest easy when they die for corporate profits. They wait and they watch, and eventually they find someone willing to hear the truth. The Thurman mine is sealed now, officially closed to the public. But if you know where to look, you can still find the entrance. And if you're quiet and respectful, you might hear something in the darkness. The sound of 47 men finally at peace. But be careful if you go there. The mines throughout these mountains are full of spirits. miners who died in accidents that weren't accidents, men who were sacrificed for coal profits and buried under lies. They're still waiting for their stories to be told. And if you make them a promise, you'd better keep it. The dead have all the time in the world to collect on their debts. My name is Daniel McLeod, and for 16 years I wore the badge of a National Park Service Ranger in Cherokee National Forest. Before that, I spent 8 years with the ATF, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Some people think park rangers just give directions to lost hikers and put out campfires. They don't know about the other side of the job. The dark side that happens deep in the mountains where cell phones don't work and the nearest sheriff is 35 miles away. I specialized in illegal distillery operations. Moonshine stills, mostly. In 16 years, I'd raided over 50 operations hidden in these Tennessee hollers. I knew every trick: how they'd hide copper tubing under creek beds, bury mash barrels in rhododendron thickets, and set up lookouts on ridgelines. I'd been shot at, threatened, and once had my truck's brake lines cut. But I'd never believed in ghosts. That changed in August of 1974. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, hot as blazes with no wind stirring in the valleys. My radio crackled to life around dawn. 3 federal agents had gone missing while investigating reports of a phantom distillery in the Cosby area. Phantom, they called it, because locals kept reporting the smell of mash and the sound of bubbling stills, but nobody could find the actual operation. "McLeod, you know those hollers better than anyone," said Agent Sandra Williams over the radio. She was my contact at the ATF, a tough woman who'd grown up in these mountains before joining federal service. "We need you to guide a search team." I drove my Green Ranger truck up the winding mountain road, past the tourist areas where families came to see black bears and waterfalls. But we weren't heading to the pretty parts. We were going into the deep hollers where old-timers still remembered Prohibition and federal agents weren't welcome. The missing agents had last been seen near Crying Creek, a narrow valley that twisted back into the mountains like a snake. Local families had been making moonshine there since before the Civil War. Their great-grandfathers had hidden stills from Union troops, and they'd been hiding them from federal agents ever since. When I met Agent Williams at the trailhead, she looked worried. Sandra was usually calm as a lake in winter, but today her hands shook slightly as she checked her service weapon. "Something's not right about this one, Dan," she said, using my first name instead of my ranger title. The agents weren't rookies. They knew these mountains. And the reports we're getting, they don't make sense. She handed me a folder full of witness statements. Local people claimed they'd seen fresh tire tracks that led nowhere. They'd smelled corn mash so strong it made their eyes water, but found no stills. One old man swore he'd heard Model T Ford engines running in the middle of the night, but there hadn't been a working Model T in these mountains for 40 years. "Folks are spooked," Sandra continued. "They're talking about Zeke McLeod still." My blood went cold when she said that name. McLeod was my family name, but I'd never heard of any Zeke. "Who's Zeke McLeod?" I asked. "Moonshiner from the 1922nd. Story goes that revenue agents caught him at his still and shot him dead. Left his body to rot next to his equipment. Some people say his ghost still runs that operation, making moonshine for the dead." I laughed, but it sounded forced even to me. "Come on, Sandra, you know better than that. These mountain folks love their ghost stories. There's a live criminal operation out there, and we need to find it before those agents wind up dead." But as we hiked deeper into Crying Creek Valley, I started to notice things that didn't fit. The air smelled wrong, not just the usual scent of damp earth and pine needles, but something else, something sharp and alcoholic that made my nose burn. The creek itself looked strange, too. Instead of the usual clear mountain water, it had an odd shimmer to it, like oil floating on the surface. When I knelt down and cupped some water in my hand, it smelled like corn whiskey. "That's impossible," I muttered. Sandra knelt beside me and sniffed the water. Her face went pale. "Dan," she whispered, "creeks don't run whiskey, not unless there's a massive spill upstream." We followed the creek deeper into the valley, looking for the source of the contamination. The forest around us grew quieter with each step. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone silent. That's when we found the first sign of the missing agents. Agent Tom Bradley's radio lay smashed against a tree, its antenna twisted into an impossible spiral. His hat sat on a stump nearby, perfectly placed like someone had set it there on purpose. But there were no footprints in the soft dirt around the stump. No signs of a struggle, just the hat and the broken radio. "This doesn't make sense," Sandra said, examining the radio with her flashlight. "It's like something threw this thing with incredible force. Look at how deep it's embedded in the tree bark." I studied the ground around the area, using tracking skills I'd learned from my Cherokee grandmother. The missing agents had definitely been here. I could see boot prints in the mud near the creek, but the prints just stopped. They didn't lead anywhere. It was like the three men had simply vanished into thin air. "Maybe they crossed the creek," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. The creek was shallow here, maybe 6 inches deep. If they'd crossed, there would be prints on the other side. There weren't any. We kept following the creek upstream, and that's when we heard it, the sound of bubbling liquid, like water boiling in a large pot. It was coming from somewhere ahead of us, hidden by the thick rhododendron bushes that lined the valley. "That's a still," Sandra whispered, drawing her service weapon. "Someone's cooking mash." I pulled out my own gun and took the lead. After 16 years of this work, I knew how to approach an illegal operation. Move quiet, stay low, watch for lookouts. But as we crept through the undergrowth, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The bubbling sound was too loud, way too loud. Industrial stills could make some noise, but this sounded like a dozen operations running at once, and there was something else, music playing softly in the background. Old-timey music, like the kind they played on the radio in the 1920 seconds. We pushed through the final curtain of rhododendron branches and froze. There in the clearing was the biggest still operation I'd ever seen. Copper tubing snaked everywhere, connecting massive wooden barrels to a collection of different-sized pots. Steam rose from a dozen different sources, and the air was thick with alcohol vapors that made my head spin. But here's what made no sense. The equipment looked old. Really old. The copper had that green patina that takes decades to develop. The wooden barrels were held together with iron hoops that showed rust and age, and there wasn't a single modern piece of equipment anywhere. "Dan," Sandra whispered, her voice shaking, "look at the bottles." Scattered around the still were hundreds of glass bottles, but they weren't the typical mason jars moonshiners use today. These were old-fashioned bottles with cork stoppers and handwritten labels. I picked one up and squinted at the faded writing. "McLeod's Best 1925. My hands started shaking. McLeod was my family name, but this bottle was older than my grandfather. "There's nobody here," Sandra said, scanning the area with her weapon drawn. "But this operation is running. Look at the steam, listen to the bubbling. Someone's been here recently." That's when we heard the car engine. It was an old engine, the kind that chugged and puttered instead of the smooth hum of modern vehicles. It was coming from the trail behind us, the same trail we'd just used to get here. "Back up?" Sandra asked hopefully. I shook my head. "We didn't call for backup, and that doesn't sound like any government vehicle I know." The engine sound got louder, then suddenly cut off. In the silence that followed, we heard car doors slam and footsteps on the trail, heavy boots walking toward our position. "Federal agents," Sandra called out. "Identify yourselves." The footsteps stopped. Then, from the trail, came a voice that made my blood freeze. "Ain't no federal agents welcome here, missy. This here's private property." The voice was rough, with a mountain accent so thick it was hard to understand. But it was also wrong somehow, like it was coming from very far away, even though the speaker couldn't be more than 50 yards from us. "Sir, this is Agent Williams with the ATF," Sandra called back. "We're investigating the disappearance of 3 federal officers. We need to speak with you." Laughter echoed through the trees. Not friendly laughter, but the kind that made you want to run away and hide. Them 3 boys? They got what was coming to them. Same as all federal agents who come poking around where they don't belong. I motioned for Sandra to stay quiet and crept toward the edge of the clearing. Through the trees, I could see a shape on the trail. It looked like a man in overalls, but something was off about him. He stood too still, like a statue. And even though it was blazing hot, steam seemed to be rising from his body. "Sir, we just want to talk," I called out. "We're not here to cause trouble." The man turned toward my voice, and I got my first clear look at him. He was tall and thin, wearing faded overalls and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was pale, almost white, and his eyes were completely black. But what made me nearly drop my gun were the dark stains on his chest. Stains that looked exactly like bullet holes. "You're a McLeod?" the man said, pointing a long finger at me. "I can smell it on you. Family blood runs true." "How do you know my name?" I asked, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. The man smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too white. "Because I'm family too, boy. Name's Zeke McLeod, and you're standing at my still." The man who called himself Zeke McLeod took a step toward us, and I saw something that made my mind reel. His feet didn't quite touch the ground. He was floating just slightly above the trail, and where his boots should have left prints, there was nothing. "That's impossible," Sandra breathed beside me. "Lots of things are impossible, Missy," Zeke said with that terrible smile. "But that don't make them less true." I tried to think rationally. Heat stroke, maybe. Hallucinations from the alcohol vapors. But Sandra was seeing the same thing I was, and she was one of the most level-headed people I knew. "Where are the missing agents?" I demanded, keeping my gun trained on the figure. Zeke laughed again, and the sound made the still equipment behind us start bubbling louder. "They're having a drink with me. Real friendly boys, once they got to know me better." He gestured toward the forest, and that's when I saw them. 3 men in federal agent suits, sitting on stumps around the still like they were at a family barbecue. But they weren't moving. They just sat there, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. "My God," Sandra whispered. "What did you do to them?" "Just gave them some of my best moonshine," Zeke said. 150 proof. Burns real good going down. Of course it burns even better coming back up. One of the agents suddenly turned his head toward us. His face was blue, and white foam dripped from his mouth. When he tried to speak, only gurgling sounds came out. "Alcohol poisoning," I realized with horror. "You forced them to drink pure grain alcohol." "Had to," Zeke said, floating closer to us. "They came here to destroy my operation, just like them revenue agents did back in 25. Shot me full of holes and left me to die next to my still. But death don't stop a McLeod from making the best damn moonshine in Tennessee." I was starting to understand, and the understanding terrified me. This thing, this ghost, or whatever it was, thought we were the same agents who had killed him 50 years ago, and he was going to do to us what he'd done to them. "We're not those agents," I said desperately. "That was a long time ago. We're just looking for the missing men. Time don't mean nothing to the dead, boy. Federal agents are federal agents. They come, they destroy, they kill, so I kill them back." Sandra fired her weapon. The bullet passed right through Zeke's chest and smashed into a tree behind him. He didn't even flinch. "Can't kill what's already dead, Missy." The air around us suddenly got thick and sweet, like breathing honey. I felt dizzy and realized that the alcohol vapors from the still were getting stronger. Much stronger. "Sandra," I gasped. "We need to get out of here. Now." But when I turned to look at her, she was swaying on her feet. Her eyes were glazed over, and she was smiling in a way that didn't look right. "Sandra? Well, hey there, darlin'," she said in an accent I'd never heard her use before. "Ain't you a handsome one? You want to try some of Zeke's special brew?" She held out her hand, and in it was one of those old-fashioned bottles. I hadn't seen her pick it up. "Sandra, fight it. Whatever he's doing to you, fight it." But she just giggled and took a swig from the bottle. Clear liquid spilled down her chin, and where it touched her skin, red welts appeared. "Tastes like home," she said in that strange accent. "Tastes like 1,925. I backed away from her, toward the trail. I had to get help. I had to get out of these mountains and bring back people who knew how to deal with whatever this was. But Zeke was blocking the trail now, and he was holding something in his hands. An old-fashioned revolver, the kind they used in the 1922nd. "You ain't going nowhere, nephew. Family's got to stick together. Besides, I got something special planned for you." Behind him, I could hear an engine starting up. But it wasn't the modern sound we'd heard before. This was definitely an old car, the kind that cranked and wheezed. Through the trees, I saw headlights approaching. Old-fashioned round headlights, like the kind on a Model T Ford. "That's my ride," Zeke said proudly. Still runs good after all these years. Of course, it don't run on gasoline anymore. Runs on something else entirely. The car pulled into the clearing, and I saw the driver. Another man in 1,920 seconds clothes, but this one had no face. Where his features should have been was just smooth, pale skin. Meet my partner, Junior, Zeke said. Lost his face to a shotgun blast in 27. Revenue agents didn't much care about collateral damage in those days. The faceless man turned toward me, and somehow I knew he was smiling. We got room for one more in the family business, Zeke continued. But first, you gotta prove you're loyal. You gotta drink with us. He held out a bottle filled with clear liquid that seemed to glow with its own light. This here's my special recipe. 100% pure grain alcohol, aged in a coffin for 50 years. It'll either make you one of us, or it'll kill you dead. Either way, you'll be staying here permanent. I looked at Sandra, who was now sitting with the other poisoned agents, all of them swaying and mumbling in voices that weren't their own. I looked at the faceless driver, whose empty head was turned toward me expectantly. And I looked at Zeke McLeod, my own family member, dead for 50 years but still making moonshine. I had to make a bold choice: drink the poison and die, or find another way out of this nightmare. Why me? I asked, stalling for time, while my mind raced for a solution. There have been other federal agents in these mountains over the years. Why am I special? Zeke's black eyes gleamed with something that might have been pride. Because you're blood, boy. McLeod blood. When they shot me down in 1925, I swore an oath that the family name would never die in these mountains. Every McLeod that came after me would carry on the tradition, one way or another. He floated closer, and I could smell death on him, not just the smell of a corpse, but something deeper. The smell of earth and copper, and 50 years of rage. Your great-granddaddy was my brother, he continued. He left these mountains after I died, too scared to stay. But the family's come home now. You're going to take over the operation. I don't know anything about making moonshine, I protested. You'll learn. Junior here will teach you. Won't you, Junior? The faceless man nodded, and when he opened his mouth to speak, black liquid poured out instead of words. That's when I remembered something my Cherokee grandmother had told me when I was a boy. She'd said that spirits of the dead could only truly harm you if you accepted something from them willingly. A gift, a drink, a promise. But they could be appeased if you showed them proper respect. Uncle Zeke, I said, using the family title deliberately, I want to honor your memory, but I need to understand what really happened in 1925. His expression changed slightly, becoming less threatening and more sad. You want to know how your family died? Yes, sir. I want to know the truth. Zeke lowered his gun and seemed to deflate slightly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more human. I wasn't just making moonshine for money, boy. I was making medicine. These mountain families, they couldn't afford real doctors. My corn liquor was all they had for pain, for infections, for everything that ailed them. I was helping people. He gestured toward the still, and for a moment it looked different, not threatening, but almost noble in its purpose. But them, federal agents, they didn't care about that. They came in shooting, didn't even give me a chance to surrender. Shot me down like a mad dog, and left me bleeding into my own mash. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. That was wrong. They were wrong. 50 years I've been waiting for someone to say that. 50 years of anger, eating at me like acid. The air around us seemed to lighten slightly, and I noticed that Sandra had stopped swaying. She was looking around with confusion, like she was waking up from a dream. But that don't change what you are, Zeke said, his voice hardening again. You're still a federal agent. You're still one of them. No, I said firmly. I'm a McLeod. I'm family. And I'm going to make this right. I holstered my gun and took a step toward him. Uncle Zeke, I swear on the family name that I'll resign from federal service. I'll make sure people know the truth about what happened to you. I'll see that you get a proper burial. Pretty words, he said suspiciously. But how do I know you mean them? Because I'm willing to drink with you. I reached for the bottle he'd offered me earlier. His eyes widened in surprise. Boy, that'll kill you deader than Christmas. Maybe. But if I'm going to be a McLeod, I need to drink McLeod moonshine. Just not here. Not like this. I want to drink it at your grave, with respect. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Then, slowly, Zeke began to smile. Not the terrible grin from before, but something almost human. You got backbone, nephew. I'll give you that. He waved his hand, and the bottle in my grasp changed. Instead of glowing poison, it now held clear mountain water. Drink, he said. And remember, your promise. I drank the water, and it was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. As I swallowed, I felt something change inside me, not death, but understanding. I could feel the weight of family history, the pain of injustice, and the responsibility of setting things right. Thank you, Uncle Zeke. He nodded once, then began to fade like morning mist. The boys will be fine, he said as he disappeared. They just had a little too much to drink. But remember, nephew, a promise to the dead is a sacred thing. Break it, and I'll be waiting for you. The Model T Ford's engine coughed to life, and the faceless driver tipped his hat to me before driving off into the forest. Within moments, both the car and the still had vanished, leaving only the natural clearing and the sound of normal creek water. Sandra shook her head and looked around in confusion. Dan, what happened? I feel like I just woke up from the strangest dream. We found the missing agents, I said, helping her to her feet. They're going to be okay, but we need to get them to a hospital. The official report said that the 3 missing agents had been drugged by persons unknown and left in the forest. They recovered fully, though none of them could remember exactly what had happened. They all resigned from federal service within 6 months. Sandra put in her transfer request a week after the incident. She said she wanted to work somewhere with better cell phone coverage. As for me, I kept my promise to Uncle Zeke. I resigned from the Park Service and took a job as a historical interpreter for the Cherokee National Forest. I spent months researching what really happened in 1925, and I found the truth in old newspaper files and federal records. Ezekiel McLeod had been a respected member of his community, known for helping sick children and injured workers with his homemade medicines. When federal agents raided his operation, local witnesses said he tried to surrender peacefully. But the agents were nervous, trigger-happy, and they shot him down without cause. The official report claimed he'd been armed and resisting arrest, but the witnesses told a different story. I made sure that story got told. I wrote articles for historical journals, gave presentations to local schools, and worked with the Cherokee Nation to put up a memorial marker near Crying Creek. The marker reads, "In memory of Ezekiel McLeod, 1890 to 1925. Mountain healer and victim of injustice. May he finally rest in peace." I also found Uncle Zeke's grave in an old family cemetery, overgrown with weeds and forgotten by time. I cleaned it up, planted mountain laurel around the headstone, and yes, I left a bottle of store-bought moonshine as an offering. But the strangest thing happened about a year later. I was leading a group of tourists on a nature walk when we passed near Crying Creek. A little girl in the group stopped and sniffed the air. "Mister," she said, tugging on my shirt, "why does the creek smell like my granddaddy's special medicine?" I knelt down and smelled the water. It was clear and clean, just like it should be. But for just a moment, just the barest hint, I caught a whiff of corn mash and copper tubing. "That's just the smell of mountain springs, sweetie," I told her. "Nothing to worry about." But as we walked away, I heard something that made me smile. Faint and far away, like an old radio playing in the distance, came the sound of 1,920 seconds music drifting through the trees. Uncle Zeke was still there, still making his medicine for those who needed it. But now he was at peace, and the federal agents who came through these mountains were safe from his anger. I learned something important in that valley. Some family businesses never really die, they just change hands. And sometimes, the dead don't want revenge as much as they want respect. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Cherokee National Forest, near a place called Crying Creek, and you smell something that reminds you of corn liquor on the wind, just remember what I learned. Respect the mountain ways, even the illegal ones. The dead have long memories, but they also have room for forgiveness. Just don't accept any drinks from strangers in old-fashioned clothes. That moonshine isn't meant for the living. My name is Margaret O'Brien, and I've been a park ranger in the Nantahala National Forest for 12 years. Before that, I worked as an emergency room nurse in Boston for 8 years. I've seen people die. I've held their hands as they took their last breath. I've told families their loved ones weren't coming home. Death doesn't scare me anymore, or at least it didn't until March of 1981. I moved to North Carolina to get away from the old country stories my grandmother used to tell. Stories about banshees and death omens. Foolish superstitions, I called them. My Cherokee friends here have their own spirit stories, but I respected those more than my grandmother's tales. Maybe because they felt connected to this land in a way my Irish folklore never did. Bear Wallow Gap sits at 5,000 feet, a narrow mountain pass that cuts through some of the roughest country in western North Carolina. It's 40 miles from the nearest hospital, and when the weather turns bad, helicopters can't fly. When someone gets hurt up there, they depend on me and my medical kit. I've done over 200 emergency evacuations in these mountains. I know my job. The first weird thing happened on March 15th. I got a radio call about 2 hikers who'd found a body near the old Cherokee Trail that runs through the gap. Male, mid-30s, no visible injuries. The hikers were shaken up pretty bad. He looked terrified. One of them told me when I reached the scene, like he'd seen something awful before he died. I examined the body. No trauma, no signs of a struggle. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, mouth open like he'd been screaming. Temperature was dropping fast, so I figured hypothermia. People do strange things when their body temperature falls. They panic, make bad decisions, freeze to death. But the hikers kept talking about something else. We heard crying before we found him, the woman said. Like a woman crying, but louder. It echoed through the whole valley. Probably whined through the rocks, I told them. Sound carries funny up here. I called for a body recovery team and filled out my report. Natural causes, likely hypothermia. Case closed. 3 days later, it happened again. This time it was a solo backpacker, found by a day hiking group. Same thing, no injuries, face twisted in terror, body temperature normal when they found him, but dropping fast by the time I got there. And again, the hikers reported hearing a woman crying before they discovered the body. It was the saddest sound I ever heard, one of them said, like someone had lost everything in the world. I started to feel uneasy. 2 unexplained deaths in the same area within 3 days wasn't normal. I requested extra patrols and began carrying additional medical equipment. Maybe there was something in the water, or some kind of gas leak from underground. I'd seen carbon monoxide poisoning before it could cause confusion and death without obvious symptoms. But deep down, something felt wrong about this place. The animals were acting strange. Squirrels and birds would suddenly go quiet when I walked the trail. My radio crackled with static more than usual. The temperature would drop 20 degrees in minutes, then warm back up just as fast. And sometimes, when the wind was still, I could swear I heard something that sounded like distant crying. On March 22nd, everything changed. I was working with Dr. Patricia Swanson, a wilderness medicine specialist who'd come up from Asheville to help investigate the deaths. We'd spent the morning taking air and water samples, looking for any environmental cause. Patricia was smart, logical, and didn't believe in anything she couldn't measure with instruments. We were heading back to the ranger station when my radio squawked. "Margaret, we've got another one," came the voice of Jim Rodriguez, one of my fellow rangers. Same area, same circumstances, but this time, his voice trailed off. "What is it, Jim?" This time we heard it too, the crying. "And Margaret, it's getting louder." Patricia and I looked at each other. She grabbed her medical kit and we headed up the trail at a fast jog. The temperature started dropping as soon as we entered the gap. By the time we reached the scene, our breath was making clouds in the air. The victim was a young woman, maybe 25, wearing proper hiking gear. She was lying on her back with her arms spread wide, like she'd been trying to defend herself from something coming from above. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the sky in absolute terror. "No pulse," Patricia said after checking her vitals. "Body's still warm, she hasn't been dead long." That's when we heard it. It started low, like wind through pine trees. Then it grew louder, clearer. It was definitely a woman's voice, crying in a way that made my chest hurt, not just sad, heartbroken. Devastated. Like the sound of a mother who'd lost her child. "What the hell is that?" Patricia whispered. The crying was coming from further up the trail, deeper into the gap. It echoed off the rock walls, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. But it was getting closer. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Now." Patricia started to argue, but then the temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. Frost began forming on the pine needles around us. In March, in North Carolina, we grabbed our gear and started back down the trail, but the crying followed us. It stayed just behind us, like someone walking in our footsteps. Every time I looked back, there was nothing there. But the sound never stopped. Halfway down the mountain, Patricia stumbled and fell. When I helped her up, her face was white as snow. "Margaret," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw something, a woman in gray walking behind us. She had long silver hair and—" Patricia swallowed hard. She was crying. Tears of blood. I looked back up the trail. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and the sound of that awful crying getting fainter as we put distance between us and the gap. We made it back to the station, but Patricia left that same afternoon. She never filed an official report about what she saw. 3 days later, I got a letter from her saying she'd taken a job in Florida and wouldn't be coming back to North Carolina. I was on my own. That night, I called my grandmother in Boston. She was 87 and still sharp as a tack. "Grandmother, tell me about banshees again. The real stories, not the fairy tale versions." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Margaret Rose O'Brien," she said finally, using my full name like she did when I was in trouble. "What have you encountered?" I told her everything. The deaths, the crying, the woman Patricia saw. "Ah, child," she said, and I could hear the sadness in her voice. "The Keening woman has found you. She follows the bloodline, you see. She always finds us in the end." "What bloodline? What are you talking about?" "The O'Brien line carries the site, Margaret. We're bound to her, and she to us. She doesn't bring death, she warns of it. But sometimes, when the death is meant for family..." The line went quiet. "Grandmother? Sometimes she tries to take us instead." After my grandmother's words, I couldn't stop thinking about death. Not just the 3 bodies I'd found, but every death I'd ever witnessed. In the ER, in the mountains, anywhere. Had there been signs I'd missed? Sounds I'd ignored? I started researching the history of Bear Wallow Gap. What I found made my blood run cold. The area had seen dozens of unexplained deaths over the past century. All of them people with Irish or Scottish last names. All of them found with no injuries but expressions of absolute terror. And going back to the 1800s, witnesses reported hearing a woman crying before each body was discovered. I also learned that Bear Wallow Gap was part of the old Cherokee Trail of Tears route. Thousands had died walking through these mountains in 1838, forced from their homes by the government. Many of the Irish settlers who moved in afterward died 2 harsh winters, accidents, disease. The gap was soaked in death and sorrow. Mary Stonecrow, an elderly Cherokee woman who lived near the forest, agreed to meet with me. She'd heard about the recent deaths and wasn't surprised when I told her what I'd experienced. "Cherokee spirits and Irish spirits," she said, shaking her head. "They don't usually mix, but pain calls to pain. The crying woman has been walking these mountains for a long time. My grandmother saw her during the removal. She cried for our people then too. How do I stop her?" Mary looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "You don't stop a force of nature, child. You learn to live with it, or you let it take you." That night, I dreamed of my great-great-grandmother, Moira O'Brien, who died during the potato famine in Ireland. In the dream, she was walking through Bear Wallow Gap, crying for all the dead she couldn't save. When she turned to look at me, her eyes were silver and tears of blood ran down her cheeks. I woke up to the sound of crying outside my cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and my service pistol, though I wasn't sure what good bullets would do against a spirit. The crying was coming from the forest behind my house, getting louder and more desperate. I followed the sound for half a mile before I found her. She was standing in a clearing where the moonlight could reach her. Tall, maybe 7 feet, with long silver hair that moved like it was underwater. Her dress was gray and seemed to be made of mist. When she turned to face me, I saw her eyes were like looking into deep wells, and blood ran from them like red tears. She opened her mouth, and the most heartbroken sound I'd ever heard came out. It wasn't just crying, it was keening, the ancient Irish death wail that women used to sing at funerals. But this was keening for every death that had ever happened in these mountains, all at once. The sound hit me like a physical force. I fell to my knees, and suddenly I could see them all, the dead, Cherokee families dying on the trail, Irish settlers freezing in their cabins, hikers falling from cliffs, hunters lost in blizzards. Every person who'd ever died in these mountains was standing around me in the clearing, and the banshee was crying for all of them. But she was looking directly at me. "No," I whispered. "I'm not ready." She stepped closer, and I felt the cold start to seep into my bones. Not weather cold, death cold, the kind of cold that comes when your heart stops beating. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. She reached out one pale hand toward my face, and I knew that if she touched me, I'd join all those other spirits standing in the clearing. That's when I remembered my grandmother's words. "She doesn't bring death, she warns of it." "Who?" I managed to say through chattering teeth. "Who's going to die?" The banshee stopped reaching for me. She turned and pointed deeper into the forest, toward Bear Wallow Gap. Then she opened her mouth and screamed, not crying now, but a sound like wind through a graveyard, like the last breath leaving someone's lungs. And then she was gone. I ran back to my cabin and radioed for backup. 3 hours later, we found another body in the gap. This time, it was Tom Wilson, a local man who'd gone up to check on his hunting cabin. But here's the thing, we found him before he was completely dead. He was in hypothermic shock, barely breathing, but alive. We got him to the hospital in time. He survived. But when he woke up 3 days later, the first thing he said was, "Did you hear her crying? She was trying to warn me about the rock slide." For 2 weeks, after that night in the clearing, I didn't see the banshee. But I felt her. She was watching, waiting. The temperature drops continued, and several hikers reported hearing distant crying, but no one else died. I started to think, maybe I'd figured it out. Maybe she really was trying to warn people, not kill them. Maybe if I listened for her cries, I could save lives instead of just finding bodies. I was wrong. On April 8th, she came for me. I was doing a routine patrol of the gap when the crying started. But this time it was different. Louder, more urgent, and it was coming from all around me, like the banshee was circling. The temperature dropped so fast that ice began forming on my jacket. My radio died. My compass started spinning. Even my watch stopped working. Then I saw her, standing right in the middle of the trail ahead of me. She looked the same as before, tall, gray, beautiful, in a terrible way. But now her silver hair was whipping around her like she was in a windstorm, and when she opened her mouth, the keening that came out was so loud it made my ears bleed. She was keening for me. "Margaret Rose O'Brien," she said, and her voice sounded like wind through broken glass. "You carry the sight. You carry the burden. Come with me." She started walking toward me, and with each step, I felt my life force being pulled out of my body. My vision started to gray around the edges. My heart slowed down. The cold wasn't just around me anymore, it was inside me, freezing my blood in my veins. "Your family has served me for centuries," she continued. "Your grandmother saw me, her grandmother before her. Now it's your turn to join the keening, to warn the living of what comes for them." I could barely speak, but I managed to whisper, "I won't leave my post. These mountains need a ranger." She stopped walking and tilted her head like she was considering this. "Then serve both," she said. "Warn the living of death, and I will let you live. But know this, you'll see every death before it happens. You'll carry the weight of every soul that passes through these mountains. And when your time comes, you'll join me in the keening." The cold receded slightly. I could breathe again. "Do you accept?" I thought about all the people I could save, all the families who wouldn't have to lose someone if I could warn them in time. The banshee wasn't evil, she was just doing her job, same as me, protecting people in the only way she knew how. I accept. She nodded once, and then she was gone. But something had changed inside me. I could feel it, a new sense, like gaining a sixth finger or growing a third eye. I could feel death moving through the mountains like weather patterns, and I knew when and where it would strike. I also knew I wasn't entirely human anymore. That was 44 years ago. I'm 79 now, and I still patrol these mountains. Officially, I retired from the Forest Service in 2001, but unofficially, I never stopped working. The death sense the banshee gave me has saved hundreds of lives. I know when a hiker is going to fall before they slip. I know when a storm is going to turn deadly before the Weather Service does. I know when someone's body is going to give out on the trail before they feel the first chest pain. I can't save everyone. Death comes when it comes, But I can warn people. Give them a chance to make different choices. The banshee still walks these mountains. Sometimes I see her on foggy nights, keeping her own patrol. We don't speak anymore, but we understand each other. We're both guardians in our own way. Other rangers have started seeing her too, the ones with Celtic blood. She's building a network, preparing for something. I don't know what yet, but I can feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Appalachian mountains and you hear a woman crying in the distance, don't ignore it. Listen. She's trying to tell you something important. The banshee doesn't come to frighten you. She comes to save you. But only if you're smart enough to listen. My name is Joshua Ironbear, and for 20 years I tracked predators in these mountains. 20 years of dealing with black bears, coyotes, and the occasional mountain lion. I thought I knew every dangerous thing that walked through Jefferson National Forest. I was wrong. People always asked me about my last name. Half Cherokee, half German, I one too half. My grandfather used to say our family was built to survive in these hills. The Cherokee side taught me to read tracks and signs. The German side made me stubborn enough to chase down any predator that threatened livestock. After 2 tours in Vietnam tracking enemy movements, these Virginia mountains felt peaceful. Even the biggest black bear seemed manageable compared to what I'd seen overseas. I had my procedures, my equipment, my 20 years of experience. I was the guy they called when something big and dangerous needed handling. That December morning in 1978 started like any other call. Bill Morrison, who ran cattle up on Thunder Ridge, was on the radio before dawn. "Josh, you need to get up here. Something got into my herd last night." I loaded my truck with the usual gear, tranquilizer gun, tracking equipment, camera for documenting damage. The weather report called for snow, but nothing too serious. Just another day dealing with a hungry bear that wandered too close to easy meat. The drive up Thunder Ridge took me through country I knew like my own backyard. Dense spruce forests, rocky outcrops, peaks that touched the clouds. This was Cherokee land once, and you could still feel the old stories in the wind. My grandmother used to tell tales about creatures that protected these mountains. Shapeshifters, guardians, things that punished those who took too much from the land. Just stories, I always figured. The kind of tales old people tell to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. When I reached Bill's ranch, the silence hit me first. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. In 20 years of tracking, I'd learned to trust these small signs. When nature goes quiet, something's wrong. Bill met me at his truck, and I could see the fear in his eyes. This was a man who'd faced down charging bulls without flinching, but his hands were shaking as he lit his cigarette. "It's not like anything I've seen, Josh. 30 head of cattle, all dead. All in one night." We walked toward the pasture, and the smell hit me, that heavy, sweet stench of death. But underneath it was something else. Something wild and musky, like a bear, but stronger. Much stronger. The cattle were scattered across the field like toys thrown by an angry child. But these weren't random kills. Each animal had been taken down with precision. Massive claw marks across their throats, clean breaks to their necks. Whatever did this knew exactly how to kill quickly and efficiently. "There?" Bill asked, though his voice said he already knew better. I knelt next to the nearest carcass and studied the wounds. The claw marks were deeper than any bear I'd seen. Wider, too. I pulled out my measuring tape and felt my stomach drop. 4 parallel grooves, each one 6 inches long and 2 inches deep. No black bear in Virginia had claws that size. That's when I saw the first track. Pressed deep into the muddy ground next to the dead cow was a footprint unlike anything in my field guides. 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes ending in massive claws. But the shape was wrong, too narrow for a bear. The heel print looked almost human. I set up my camera and started documenting everything, following the tracks as they led away from the pasture. They headed straight up the mountain, toward the old-growth forest, where few people ever went. Each print was perfectly preserved in the soft earth, showing details that made my skin crawl. Whatever made these tracks walked on 2 legs. Bill followed me as I worked, chain smoking and jumping at every sound. "What you thinking, Josh?" Some kind of escaped zoo animal? I wanted to give him an answer that made sense. A rogue bear. A pack of feral dogs. Even a hoax seemed more likely than what the evidence was showing me. I'm not sure yet, I told him, but I'm going to find out. The snow started falling as I finished my documentation. Big, wet flakes that stuck to everything and made the world feel smaller. More isolated. By the time I packed up my equipment, the wind was picking up too. Storm's coming in fast, Bill said, squinting at the dark clouds rolling over the peaks. Radio says it might dump 2 feet before it's done. I looked at the tracks leading up into the forest, already starting to fill with snow. Whatever made them was up there somewhere, and soon the weather would wash away any chance of following the trail. I'm going to take a quick look before this gets worse, I said. Bill grabbed my arm. Josh, don't. Not alone, not with that thing up there. But I'd spent 20 years tracking dangerous animals, and I'd never backed down from a challenge. How dangerous could one confused creature be? As I walked toward the tree line, following those impossible tracks, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Vietnam. The feeling of being watched, hunted. I stopped and looked back at Bill, standing small and frightened next to his truck. The snow was falling harder now, and the world was disappearing into white silence. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound that started as a low growl but ended almost like a chuckle, like something big and intelligent was laughing at the joke I didn't understand yet. The joke was on me. I thought I was the hunter. The tracks led me deep into old-growth forest, where the spruce trees grew so thick they blocked out most of the sky. Snow fell in fat, silent flakes, and my breath came out in white puffs. I'd been following the trail for an hour, and the prints were getting clearer, not fainter. Whatever made them was heavy, really heavy. Each track pressed deep into the forest floor, and I could see where massive claws had gouged bark from trees 8 feet off the ground. No bear could reach that high standing on 2 legs. My radio crackled with static. I tried calling back to headquarters, but the storm was interfering with transmission. Just broken voices and electronic noise. I was on my own up here, following something that shouldn't exist. The trees started thinning out as I climbed higher, and that's when I found the second kill site. The deer hung from a low branch, gutted and arranged in a way that made my blood run cold. The animal had been cleaned with surgical precision, its organs removed and placed in a perfect circle around the base of the tree. This wasn't feeding behavior. This was ritual. I took pictures with shaking hands. In all my years tracking predators, I'd never seen anything like this. Bears didn't perform ceremonies with their kills. Bears didn't think symbolically, but something did. The wind picked up, carrying that musky scent again, and I heard something moving in the trees ahead. Heavy footsteps crunching through snow. Deliberate, measured, like something was walking upright on 2 legs. I pulled out my tranquilizer gun and checked the load. 1 dart filled with enough sedative to drop a 400-pound black bear. It would have to be enough. The footsteps stopped. The forest went completely silent. No wind, no snow falling from branches. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. I stood perfectly still, listening, waiting. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse through the trees, something massive and dark moving between the trunks. Too tall to be a bear. Too broad to be human. For just a second, I caught sight of a silhouette that looked like a nightmare hybrid of both. Then it was gone. I followed as fast as I could, crashing through underbrush and sliding on snow-covered rocks. But whatever it was moved through the forest like smoke. No sound, no broken branches. Just those deep tracks in the snow leading higher up the mountain. My radio squawked again, and this time I caught a few clear words. Severe weather warning. Roads closed. Emergency shelter. The storm was getting worse. I needed to head back before I got trapped up here. But those tracks were calling to me, leading me deeper into country where few people ever went. Country where old Cherokee stories said things lived that weren't quite animal and weren't quite human. I was about to turn back when I heard the screaming. Human screaming, coming from somewhere ahead, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the wind like a knife. Someone was in trouble up there. I ran toward the sound, fighting through snow that was getting deeper with every step. The screaming stopped abruptly, leaving only the howl of wind through trees. I found them in a small clearing near the ridgetop. 3 members of a state wildlife survey team sent up to investigate reports of unusual predator activity. I recognized Dr. Robert Crane, a biologist I'd worked with before. He was lying twisted against a fallen log, his neck bent at an impossible angle. The other two were arranged in sitting positions against trees, their eyes wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. They'd been dead for hours, but their bodies were still warm. Steam rose from their blood in the cold air. That's when I noticed the tracks around the clearing. Dozens of them, circling the dead men like they'd been stalked, played with, before being killed. And in the center of the circle, something had been written in the snow using a stick. Cherokee symbols I recognized from my grandmother's stories. A warning that roughly translated to, "Trespassers will feed the earth." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera steady. This wasn't random predator behavior. This was intelligence, planning, revenge. Something had declared war on anyone who entered its territory. The wind died down for a moment, and in the sudden quiet I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, deep, coming from the trees at the edge of the clearing. Something was watching me. Something that could crush 3 armed men and arrange their bodies like pieces on a chessboard. I raised my tranquilizer gun and tried to spot movement in the shadows. "I know you're there," I called out. "I'm not here to hurt you, I just want to understand." The breathing stopped. Then I heard something that nearly made me drop my weapon. A sound that started as a growl but shaped itself into words. English words, spoken in a voice like rocks grinding together. Understanding comes through suffering. Whatever was out there could speak, could think, could choose its victims and play with them before it killed. I backed away from the clearing, keeping my gun raised, trying to reach the trail back down the mountain. Snow was falling harder now, and the wind was picking up again. If I didn't get off this ridge soon, I'd be trapped up here with something that collected trophies from its kills. Behind me, I heard that grinding voice again, closer this time. Joshua, Iron Bear, Cherokee, and German, 20 years. I hunting, my children. It knew my name, it knew my background. It had been watching me long before I started tracking it. I ran. I made it halfway down the mountain before my radio exploded with panicked voices. Emergency frequencies lighting up with reports I couldn't believe. Multiple units not responding. Last known position, Thunder Ridge. Found the search helicopter crashed. Pilot and co-pilot missing. Something took out the entire military tracking team, only found pieces of equipment. I stopped behind a large stacking boulder to catch my breath and piece together what was happening. In the space of 12 hours, whatever was up on that ridge had killed a survey team, brought down a helicopter, and eliminated an entire military unit sent to investigate. This wasn't some confused animal. This was a coordinated assault. My radio crackled, and I caught a transmission from base camp. All units evacuate immediately. Repeat, all personnel evacuate Thunder Ridge area. We have confirmed multiple fatalities and... Static cut off the rest. I was alone on a mountain with something that was systematically killing everyone who entered its territory. The smart thing would be to run as fast as I could down to the road and get out of these mountains forever. But I couldn't stop thinking about those Cherokee symbols written in the snow. The way that thing had spoken my name, like it knew my family history. Like it was personally offended by my presence here. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The snow was coming down so hard now I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My tracks were filling in behind me, which meant I was leaving no trail for rescue teams to follow. If I got lost in this storm, they'd find my body in the spring. If they found it at all, I was trying to figure out my next move when I heard engines in the distance. Vehicle engines, struggling up the mountain road. Help was coming. I worked my way toward the sound and found a military convoy stopped at a roadblock. 6 vehicles, maybe 20 soldiers, all armed and looking nervous. Their leader, a young lieutenant, was studying a topographical map while his men unloaded heavy equipment. "Sir, you need to get off this mountain immediately," he said when he saw me approaching. "We have orders to contain the situation." "What situation?" I asked. "What do you think you're dealing with up there?" He looked at me like I was crazy. "Rogue predator of unknown species. Possibly escaped from a noted to me. Private collection. We have authorization to use lethal force." I wanted to laugh. These soldiers had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they could solve this problem with guns and military tactics. "Lieutenant, I've been tracking whatever's up there. It's not what you think. It's intelligent. It speaks English. It knows things about people it shouldn't know. Sir, you're suffering from exposure and shock. We'll have you evacuated as soon as we secure the area." There was no point arguing with him. I watched as his men checked their weapons and started up the trail toward the ridge. 20 trained soldiers with automatic rifles, night vision, and radio communication. They never had a chance. I was still at the roadblock when the screaming started. Not human screaming this time. Something else. Something that sounded like the mountain itself was roaring in anger. Gunfire erupted from up the trail. Automatic weapons firing in long bursts, then shorter bursts, then single shots, then silence. The lieutenant grabbed his radio. "Alpha Team, report. Alpha Team, do you copy?" "Static." "Bravo Team, what's your status up there?" More static. Within minutes, every radio channel was dead. 20 soldiers had disappeared into the storm like they'd never existed. That's when I heard the voice again, carried on the wind down from the ridge. That grinding, rocky voice that spoke English with perfect clarity. Joshua, the Cherokee. To boy, who forgot his people's warnings. It was calling to me specifically, not the soldiers, not the search teams, me. The lieutenant was frantically trying to reach headquarters, but all communications were down. The storm had cut us off from the outside world, and something on that mountain was picking off rescue teams like they were target practice. "We need to evacuate," I told him. "Get everyone off this mountain right now." But even as I said it, I knew we were too late. The snow was too deep for vehicles now. The roads would be impassable until the storm passed. We were trapped down here, and whatever was up there could come for us whenever it wanted. The lieutenant made the call to establish a defensive perimeter and wait for air support. But I could see the fear in his men's eyes. They'd heard the stories about the missing teams. They knew their rifles might not be enough against something that could take out 20 soldiers without leaving a trace. As night fell, I sat in one of the vehicles trying to make sense of what was happening. In Cherokee folklore, there were stories about guardians, ancient spirits that protected sacred places from those who would harm them, shapeshifters that could take the form of great bears but retained human intelligence. The Kiowa called them NVI, the bear people, protectors of the old ways. But those were just stories, legends to teach respect for the land and its creatures, weren't they? Outside, the wind was howling like something alive and angry. The soldiers huddled around their vehicles, jumping at every sound. And somewhere up on Thunder Ridge, something was waiting for the right moment to come down and finish what it started. I could feel it watching us, patient, intelligent, planning our deaths with the same careful precision it had used on all the others. The attack came at 3 a.m. I was dozing in the back of a military transport when the first soldier started screaming. Not fear screaming, pain screaming. The kind of sound a man makes when something with very large claws is tearing him apart. I grabbed my gear and rolled out of the vehicle into knee-deep snow. Floodlights blazed from the convoy, turning the storm into a swirling wall of white. But in that white wall, I could see a shadow moving. Something huge and dark, flowing between the vehicles like liquid death. Gunfire erupted from all directions. Muzzle flashes lit up the night as soldiers fired at something they couldn't properly see. Shouted orders mixed with screams of pain and terror. "Target at 2 o'clock. I can't see it. Johnson's down. Johnson's down." I pressed myself against a truck tire and tried to track the movement. Whatever was out there was fast, impossibly fast for something its size. It would appear behind one group of soldiers, strike, then vanish before they could return fire. A soldier ran past me, his face white with panic. "It's not human," he screamed. "It's not fucking human." That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. 12 feet tall, standing upright like a man but built like a massive bear. Its fur was black as midnight, and its eyes reflected the floodlights like yellow mirrors. Claws longer than kitchen knives. Teeth that belonged in a saber-toothed tiger's skull. But the most terrifying thing was its face. Part bear, part human, all intelligence. It looked at the soldiers, not like prey, but like problems to be solved. Obstacles to be removed. It grabbed a soldier by the head with one enormous hand and lifted him off the ground. The man's rifle fell from his fingers as those claws pierced his skull like it was made of paper. The Cherokee boy, it said, and its voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Come, face. What? Your people forgot. It was calling to me. In the middle of slaughtering a military unit, it wanted to have a conversation. I stepped out from behind the truck, my tranquilizer gun feeling pathetically small in my hands. I'm here. Let them go. This is between you and me. The creature tossed the dead soldier aside like a broken toy and turned to face me fully. Up close, I could see the human intelligence burning in those yellow eyes. This wasn't just a predator. This was something far older and far more dangerous. You know, the old stories, it said. Your grandmother told you about the guardians. The envy, I whispered. The bear people. I am the last of my kind. The last guardian of these sacred mountains. And you brought destroyers to my home. The surviving soldiers had stopped shooting. They stood frozen in a circle around us, weapons pointed at something they couldn't understand or fight. I didn't know, I said. I was just doing my job, protecting livestock. The creature laughed, and the sound was like boulders falling down a cliff. Protecting the invaders, who poison my streams and cut my forests. You chose their cattle over my children. It started walking toward me, each step crushing snow and leaving prints 3 inches deep. I raised my tranquilizer gun, but we both knew it was useless. For 20 years, you have helped them destroy what took thousands of years to grow. Tonight, you pay the price. That's when I understood. This wasn't random violence. This was justice, delivered by something that had watched its territory being slowly destroyed for decades. Every cow I'd protected, every predator I'd relocated, every decision I'd made to serve human interests over natural ones. It had been keeping score. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to remember what your people knew, that some places are sacred, that some guardians never sleep, that the old contracts must be honored. It stopped just outside my reach, close enough that I could smell the wildness on its fur, see the ancient wisdom in its eyes. Make them leave, it said. All of them. Make this mountain sanctuary again, or I will kill every human who sets foot here. I looked around at the terrified soldiers, at the bodies scattered in the body's snow, at the vehicles that represented everything the creature saw as invasion and destruction. How do I know you'll stop killing if I do what you ask? Because you will become my voice in their world. You will make them understand that some places belong to the old powers. It reached out with one massive clawed hand and touched my shoulder. Not threatening, almost gentle. Choose. Joshua. Iron Bear. Serve. Rebe. Destroyers. And die with them. Or remember your Cherokee blood and help me save what remains. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the responsibility that came with knowing the old ways, about 20 years of putting human convenience above natural balance. I lowered my gun. I'll do it, I said. I'll make them understand. The creature nodded once, then looked up at the storm clouds gathering around the peak. Then, you will? is live. 2. See. To see the morning. But, remember, Cherokee, boy, I will be watching. Always watching. It turned and walked back toward the tree line, melting into the shadows between the spruces. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only those impossible tracks in the snow. The surviving soldiers stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I knew what I had to do. The storm passed by dawn, leaving Thunder Ridge buried under 3 feet of snow. When the rescue helicopters finally arrived, they found 12 dead soldiers, destroyed equipment, and 1 park ranger with a story nobody wanted to believe. The official report called it a predator attack by an unknown large carnivore, possibly a hybrid bear species. The military classified most of the details and quietly established Thunder Ridge as a protected ecological research zone, which meant no hunting, no logging, no development, and very limited human access. I didn't fight their version of events. I just made sure the protection orders were real and permanent. That was 43 years ago. I'm 91 now, and I've spent every day since that night making sure the mountain stays protected. I became an environmental activist, a lobbyist for wilderness preservation, a voice for the voiceless. People think I'm just an old ranger who found religion late in life. They don't know about the real reason Thunder Ridge remains untouched. But I know. And more importantly, it knows. I still go up there sometimes, when my old bones can handle the climb. Not to the ridgetop, I'm not welcome there, but to the lower slopes, where I can leave offerings of tobacco and sage, where I can show proper respect to the guardian that spared my life. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I catch a whiff of that wild, musky scent. Sometimes I find tracks in the mud that are too big and too human-shaped to belong to any bear in the books. Then Vi is still up there, still watching, still protecting. And I'm not the only one who knows about guardians anymore. Over the past decade, I've gotten calls from rangers and biologists all over Appalachia. Stories that sound too familiar, cattle killings that show impossible precision, tracks that don't match any known species, ancient burial sites where the trees have started growing in perfect circles. The old powers are waking up. After centuries of sleep, the guardians are responding to what we've done to their sacred places. Strip mining, clear cutting, mountaintop removal, pollution that turns streams acidic and kills everything downstream. They're angry, and they're done being patient. Last month, a mining operation in West Virginia shut down after their entire crew of 40 men vanished overnight. The official story blamed a methane explosion, but the rescue teams found no bodies. Just strange tracks leading away from the site and symbols carved into trees that old Cherokee like me recognize as warnings. 3 weeks ago, a logging company in Tennessee abandoned a project after their equipment kept getting destroyed by something that left claw marks 12 feet off the ground. Their security cameras showed nothing but static whenever the attacks happened. The guardians are remembering their purpose, remembering why they were created in the first place. I've tried to warn people, environmental groups, government agencies, anyone who will listen. But who believes an old ranger talking about ancient spirits and shape-shifting bears? They'll believe soon enough. Because the Novhi on Thunder Ridge isn't alone anymore. They're calling to each other across the mountains, coordinating their response to what they see as an invasion that's gone on too long. The old contracts are being renegotiated. The terms are simple. Respect the sacred places or face the consequences. I keep a map on my wall marked with red pins, every location where strange killings have been reported, where ancient symbols have appeared, where the land itself seems to be fighting back against human destruction. The pins are multiplying. If you live in Appalachia, if you work in the mountains, if you think you can take whatever you want from the old places without consequences, then you need to understand something. They're watching, they're waiting, and they're done giving warnings. The guardians are awake, and they remember what these mountains were like before we came. They remember the contracts our ancestors made and then forgot. They remember every sacred grove that's been cut down, every stream that's been poisoned, every creature that's been driven to extinction, and they're keeping score. So when you hear stories about impossible creatures in the deep woods, about killings that don't make sense, about ancient symbols appearing where they shouldn't be, remember this old ranger's advice. Stay away from the sacred places, show respect for the old powers, and never, ever assume you're the apex predator in these ancient mountains. Because something bigger, older, and far more intelligent than you is waiting in the shadows between the trees. Something that was here before your great-great-grandfather was born, and will be here long after your great-great-grandchildren are dust. The Navajo are real, the Guardians are waking up, and they're done being patient with trespassers. My name is Joshua Ironbear, and I've spent 43 years keeping this secret. But now, it's time for people to know the truth. The old powers never left, they were just sleeping, and we finally made enough noise to wake them up.